Figueroa Villa, and Kim are present, and we have a quorum. Number 1 on the agenda, consent agenda items.
Great. I'd like to pull item 1A. Do we have any comments on items 1B, C, D, E, F, G, or H?
We have a comment on H.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve items 1B, C, D, E, F, and G?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Call the comment on item 1H, please.
For 1H, we have Matthew Preston Schubert.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. I noticed that there's some terrorism promotion going on, anti-terrorism promotion. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of confusion in the community between the police and the community. The community seems to be at concern for the way police are behaving towards them, the lack of compassion. They seem to have feelings hurt. They seem to be in a lot of pain. I think this is going back and forth, and I think that the terrorism promotion billboards is a good idea, but also I believe that the police need to back that to the full extent and not be up and down. The up and down behavior causes a confusion in the community, and it promotes the possibility of terrorism happening and being allowed, which is why you have anti-terrorism groups happening. You have people that are retaliating against the police, people that are scaring the police, which is why the police are speaking to the mayor's office. You know, there's just a lot. The police need to stick to themselves. The police need to regroup about this terrorism issue and about these terrorism complaints. I believe that if the police did this and they acted forthcomingly, honestly, and secured the situation with the energy that they have in the appropriate way, then they would have a better response from the community, and I think that is the goal here. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And please let the record reflect Commissioner McLean Hill is now present.
Good morning. Do I have a motion to approve item 1H?
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? One opposed.
One opposed.
And so let's call item 1A, please.
1A, Department's report dated September 9th, 2016, relative to the donation of wireless devices and data service valued at $849,377 from the Los Angeles Police Foundation for the benefit of the Los Angeles Police Department.
All right. Good morning, Police Commission.
Good morning.
Commander Regina Scott, Assistant Commanding Officer of Information Technology Bureau. And this donation is from Sprint. It's an in-kind, so there's no money transported. They're going to donate the phones. The phones are connected to our body-worn camera system. It will allow the officers to be able to review their video. It'll allow the officers to be able to be connected as far as we're going to do a connected officer where we'll be able to create apps for the officers to give them some resources at their fingertip. We'll be able to have them leverage some of the crime trends that are happening. It'll allow them to do FIs automated, so they'll go directly in the system. It'll also allow them to do stop data so that they'll be able to put their information in as their stop. It provides us for the phones. It also gives us the ability to manage the devices remotely, and it will also pay for the data for 1 year.
Great, thank you.
Was the donor Samsung to the Police Foundation?
I'm sorry, say that.
Who was the donor to the
Sprint.
Police Foundation? Samsung.
Sprint.
Oh, Sprint. I see.
Correct.
Oh, they're Samsung devices, but it was Sprint.
Yes.
Okay.
Move to approve the item.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We're now on item number 2, the report of the Chief of Police, Chief Beck.
Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Just a couple things before you start. I'm sure you'll talk about this as well. I had the privilege of attending the 2016 Above and Beyond Award Ceremony with my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Soboroff, Commissioner McLean Hill and Commissioner Figueroa Villa. It was really a fantastic ceremony. It was great to be a part of the first ceremony where we awarded the Preservation of Life Award, which I think is a fantastic award, and hopefully other departments around the country will follow suit. Obviously, we had Purple Heart Award winners and Medal of Valor Award winners as well, and it was really a testament to the brave men and women of the Los Angeles Police Department. It was a great to be a part of that. One other thing I'd like to mention is I read in the paper about the wrongful arrest of Guillermo Torres. I know the department is doing an investigation into the facts and circumstances surrounding that. I know that's being led by Deputy Chief Matt Blake. We had someone here who was spent 17 days in custody, was arrested in his workplace. So I think that was, certainly very disturbing for all of us to hear about and read about. So when Deputy Chief Blake is done with his review, I'd like that report back to the commission on that as well.
Commissioner, on the last item, the department has initiated a personnel investigation into the circumstances, partially based on Chief Blake's initial review. So if we could make that a closed session item, that would be more appropriate.
Sure, thank you.
Because it's a personnel matter, and personnel matters are protected under Police Officer Bill of Rights. So before I begin my report, I would like to express the department's sorrow and condolences to the survivors of two individuals who have had a significant impact on the Los Angeles Police Department in its past. And the first is former police commissioner and former police commission president Stanley Scheinbaum, who passed this last week. I knew the commissioner when I was a lieutenant. I also attended a class at UCLA that he was a guest instructor at, had many interactions with him. He and I didn't agree on many things, but I certainly believed in his commitment to making LA a better place, and we are a lesser city because of his passing. I'd also like to express the same sentiments about former County Supervisor Ed Edelman, who passed. Mr. Edelman served as a civilian member on boards of rights for many years in the times during the 90s when we had 3 or 4 times the amount of boards of rights that we do now. Mr. Edelman and I were partnered on multiple different inquiries, boards of rights, and I always found him to be a very reasonable man who had a huge impact on the city and the county of Los Angeles. Obviously, above and beyond, I think President Johnson expressed my feelings about above and beyond already. The only thing I would like to add is that was the best attended Medal of Valor ceremony that the police department's ever had. We had almost 1,000 people in attendance. It was a great way to recognize some true heroes that put their own safety at risk for others, and whether they got the Medal of Valor or the Preservation of Life Medal or the Purple Heart, all of them were heroic in their actions and made a difference in other people's lives. I'd also like to mention that we'll be reopening the Legion Park Police Academy this week. That's a great milestone in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department. It will not only be available for graduations and other events, but also once again become the heart of the department's in-service training efforts and a place where recruit officers begin and end their time in the police academy. Before I get into general crime stats, I'd like to talk a little bit about the month of August. Last year, August was the deadliest month in multiple years in the history of Los Angeles. This August, the city was considerably safer. Well, not as safe as we would like, of course, but considerably safer. We had almost a 20% reduction in homicides versus the previous August, and a 21% reduction in numbers of victims shot relative to the previous August. And I wanted to not only recognize that as a positive point for the city, but also for the department, the Office of Operations and the other offices had a good plan, stuck to their plan, and through the use of CSOC and making sure that we had appropriate resources in the right places, they were able to make sure that we didn't have an August that repeated our last August. General crime stats, and these are as of the 10th of this month. Homicides are down 2.9% as compared to last year. Rapes are down 6.5%. Robberies are at a 12.6% increase, and aggravated assaults are at a 14.7% increase. That gives us a total violent crime picture of 12.1% increase, although we have been going in the right direction on that for the past number of weeks, and are steadily chipping away at that number, so that's a positive thing. Property crime, burglaries, residential burglaries in particular, are down 4.4%. Motor vehicle thefts are following a statewide trend of increase at 15.7% increase. Particularly in the last month, we've seen an increase in burglary theft from vehicles, vehicle break-ins, and we're sitting at about a 9.3% increase there. And general thefts, personal thefts, are down 1.9%. Gives a property crime picture of an increase over last year of 4.1%, and that gives us a total Part 1 crime picture, the combined violent and property crime increase of 5.8%. In shooting victims, a very important statistic, because the department has concentrated on reducing the number of shooting victims and the number of homicides over this summer. We're at a 3.3% reduction in shooting victims from last year. Officer-involved shootings are down 5.1% over the 4-year average, and about 30%
We have order,
over
please.
last year.
We have order,
Gang-related
please.
crime. Gang-related crime is down 11.6% in homicide, and up 4.0% in total gang-related crime. Traffic collisions are up in total in the city.
Excuse me, can you please keep, if you have a comment, you can submit a comment card. Sir, ma'am, you're interrupting. Next morning, I'm going to ask you to leave.
Traffic collisions are up 8.5% in the city of Los Angeles. To give you an idea of the volume, that's 37,000 traffic accidents so far year to date that are reportable, and as compared to 34,000 last year. Driving under the influence traffic accidents are down 3.6%. Hit and runs are up 5.1%. Motor vehicle versus pedestrians are down 3.3%. But a particular concern, though, in the fatal category of motor vehicle versus pedestrian, we have suffered 27 more fatalities this year than last, so far year to date. That's 66 versus 49. Motor vehicle versus pedestrians are one of the most serious types of accidents because of the injuries that are incurred, and are something that we concentrate on. And I know that LA has a much different standard than some other big cities, particularly eastern cities, as it relates to jaywalking enforcement and pedestrian and roadway enforcement. But this is why we do it, because these are such horrific accidents that cost so many lives. Bicycle-involved collisions are down 18.2%, and they're actually down in the fatal category and in the serious injury category too. which is really important because, you know, as you are well aware, we've seen a tremendous increase in bicycle use in the city of Los Angeles. So that's a positive thing. I think it shows what Department of Transportation has done with bike lanes. Personnel statistics, we have 9,811 sworn personnel on payroll, 2,748 civilian personnel assigned to Los Angeles Police Department. That's 529 vacant civilian positions. So we still suffer from civilian vacancies. We have about 425 reserve officers, 284 specialist volunteers, 58 chaplains, and just shy of 8,000 young people in our cadet program, which we are very proud of. And that concludes my report.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson, I have a question of the chief.
Sure.
Chief, while you were on vacation, there were a couple of matters that were raised during public comment that I'd like to just put on your radar screen in order to secure a report back. One relates to the Izil Ford matter. And my question with respect to that.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I couldn't hear you.
Okay, hold on. Professor Abdullah, the first 2 rows are reserved for police officers. There are, I see available seats in the public rows.
Right, but there's people locked out because they're told there's no more seats.
There are officers who are becoming in. Professor Abdullah, I'm asking you to please move to one of the public seats. We need to keep those seats open. People are coming in and out of the meeting who give presentations.
We had to go around the back of the building, right? The black organizers have to go around the back of the building on Tuesdays only for police commission meeting. As we think about what's happening here, that the police can sit in our rows, does this remind you of anything? Remember rows?
Professor Abdullah, can you please,
Let them come sit up in their rows and give us their rows.
can you please move to one of the seats in the public rows? There are seats available. This is,
Reserved for me, because there's people locked outside told that they can't come in.
Professor Abdullah, can you please move? Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room. And we do. Can you please move so we do not have to take a recess and delay everybody here because of one person?
You got all day.
I have tried.
That's fine, there's 40 more people.
Well, but the problem is your actions are going to cause a lot of other people to not have the option to participate. This is not a debate.
The officers are moving.
That's not versus the city of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Okay, can everybody please have a seat so we can continue with the meeting, please? Okay, let's bring the meeting back to order, please. Commissioner McClain-Hill, could you actually start your question over again?
Well, actually, it was just simply to a simple preface to a request to the chief. While you were away on vacation, there were 2 matters that came up rather repeatedly that I'd like to get some report back from you on. One involves Izil Ford, and a member of the public inquired as to when some action on that matter might be taken. And as you know, it's been over a year since this commission made its ruling with respect to the out-of-policy finding. So I would appreciate a report back on that. And in addition to that, there was another member of the public who inquired on several occasions regarding the release of information concerning a shooting in Watts. And I understand the specific information involves the name of the officers. I understand that that is another matter that rests with your decision-making. And I do understand the sensitive nature of the release of that information, but I would also like a report back as to when we can expect those two items to be addressed. I do understand that there is to be no discussion of those items today. They're not on the agenda. And the city attorney will determine what matters can be discussed in open session and what matters will need to be discussed in closed. But I do just want to put that on your radar screen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, sir, we have 9 comment cards. The first 4, Prentice Jenkins, Jerry Dietrich, Jojo Smith, and Beth Kemp.
Prentice Jenkins, published a City Life newsletter, activist since 1991. I'd like to say good morning to the board.
Good morning.
Good morning. President Johnson, Vice President Soboroff. Good to see you, Chief. That was an excellent example of de-escalation. I'd like to say that I'm very honored at what my colleague, Dr. Abdullah, did, and I'm honored at the de-escalation of what the officers did. They moved. A year ago, it would have been a fight in here. That is to the credit of Dr. Abdullah and the credit to President Johnson, Vice President Soboroff, and the Chief, because that was de-escalation. That's what de-escalation is about. See, there would have been arrest in here a year ago, but the officers moved, and it's all over now. It took, what, all of 5 minutes to finish it off. So it's one thing to talk about de-escalation. It's another thing to see it. 2 weeks ago, they allowed us protesters to stay in here for another 30 minutes. No one got arrested. A year ago, they would have. De-escalation, folks. It's actually working. We may not see it, but it's actually working. So that is a credit to all of us out here, the activists out here. That's a credit to the board. That's a credit to you, Chief. I'm still one of your supporters. But you do understand that just as Commissioner McLean Hill said, something's got to be done about those cops that killed Ezell Ford. I still want that done. That's got to be done. De-escalation is important, and I'm willing to help here, Chief. I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and help, but you got to help also.
Thank you
Jerry
for your comments.
Dietrich.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Dietrich, and I'm with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I want to talk about Chief Beck, who earns $300,000 annually to run the most murderous police force in the nation. I feel that Chief Beck must go. The man has shown nothing but contempt for the people of L.A. He has also shown nothing but contempt for this commission. His repeated inaction in response to the requests of the people is nothing compared to the inaction he has displayed to this board. Excuse me. Many times I've witnessed the commission asking Beck for something and he has failed to comply. I've narrowed my speech down to 3 main points because the three main areas that show Beck needs to go, even though I could list dozens. Number 1, 8 officers of the LAPD opened a fire on a pair of Latina women driving a blue Toyota truck because they thought it was Christopher Dornan, a black man driving a gray Nissan truck. 100 shots were fired, and the city of L.A. had to pay the women $4.2 million for the lawsuit that followed. Next, in the case of Officer Sean Hillman, the disciplinary board recommended he be fired for lack of integrity in the incident in which he pulled a gun and uttered racial slurs, according to a video. But Beck merely handed the man a 65-day suspension because he's buddies with his dad, a former LAPD officer, and his uncle, a former LAPD deputy chief. Lastly, the fiasco with the sabotaging of video cameras on police vehicles. As I'm sure you remember, the consent decree was lifted in part because of all the improvements made by the LAPD. One such improvement was the installation of cameras on police vehicles. 80 of the cars in South LA had their cameras made inoperable. Beck found out about this problem in early July. He told Soboroff, then president, in September. The entire commission didn't find out until February. To me, this shows the contempt Chief Beck has for this body. Even though your role is to be the eyes and ears of the community to keep the LAPD in line, he didn't see fit to inform you of the crisis. I'd like to end with Beck's own words to this commission, quote, "If I ever become a detriment to this department because of my personality, because of something I did, then I'm gone," unquote. Please keep him to his word.
Jojo Smith.
Jojo Smith, Los Angeles Community Action Network. Chief Beck talks about stats, but he didn't tell you about the stats that LA leads the nations in unarmed killings. Unarmed killings. Ezell Ford, you know, y'all found it in policy that they were out of policy, and there's nothing happening. Sister, thank you for bringing that up, but nothing's going to ever happen because Chief Beck says, I don't want to break my men's morale. What about the people's morale? Chief Beck, you're a piece of shit. You need to go. And to this board, stop rubber stamping all their bullshit.
Beth Kemp. Beth Kemp, followed by the Red Chief and Michael Williams.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to start by saying fire Chief Beck. Chief Beck has been the police, the chief of police here for quite a while now, and we have not seen any improvement in the way these officers act. In the past month, 3 teenagers were killed. When Jesse Romero was killed, he was called a gang member, a 20-year-old gang member by your cops. He was 14 years old. I'm curious to know what happens to the guns in these buyback programs. Are you using them to plant on suspects, as you call them, and it seems like after somebody is murdered, the investigation stops. Yes, I know there's an internal investigation, but people don't hear about it. People don't know what really happened. You say Riddell Jones was running away with a knife. Well, let's see the knife. Let's, have a full investigation as to what happened. Did she really rob a store? We shall never know, and this is the problem. The police commission needs to get to the bottom of these things. They need to hold the officers accountable. As I stated 2 weeks ago, Section 137 of the California State Civil Code says that you can hold these cops accountable, you can remove them from office, and you can take away their entire year's pay. And I think that's what needs to happen, and this pay needs to go to the families who are losing their homes, who are losing everything, their jobs, their state of mind, their peace, because they don't have anything. And you want to talk about, care about the families, fuck you guys and your idea of what family is, because your family is killing our family. Your family is killing the community and getting away with it. I believe that any officer who kills anyone in the line of duty should be held to the same regard any person here in this audience or in this city should be held. They should be charged with murder. They should have their weapons taken away. They should no longer be on the streets. And it is unfair that they continue to roam the streets, kill people, harass people, and then their entire, and everything they've done is taken off of their books. That's not fair. We're judged by what we do. They should be judged by what they do.
Red Chief.
Excuse me before you start. Hold the clock for a second.
Sure.
If you're interested in reading information on these officer-involved shootings, the categorical uses of force, after they are adjudicated by the Board of Police Commissioners, the chief's report is available in the room right next door, the Police Commission office, through a public information request you can fill out. The Inspector General's independent analysis is available online within 24 hours. Mr. Bustamante, of the how long before your report is published online?
It's generally within a day or two. High-profile incidents, we try to expedite things to get it online. It generally will have a summary of the facts for the case and then the commission's rationale and its vote.
So that information is also available. And I'd like to point out that within the constraints of California law, there's no other department in the state of California that is as forthcoming as we are with information regarding these reports. Okay, can we have order, please? Next. Okay.
Okay, the next speaker, the Red Chief.
Please, let's have order.
Okay, first of all, I call for the Warren Commission to do an independent investigation. I don't see LAPD really investigating themselves. At no consequences should LAPD be investigating themselves. The jig is just about up, Matt Johnson and Chief Beck. On November 10th, I was arrested, and we do have pictures from LA Times. And then on January 15th, I was arrested for wearing my scarf again over in City Hall, approximately at 9:40. You know what the city said about that, and you know what the federal judge said about that. You got to pay double the amount. But the paperwork, the legalese is getting ready to go in. So Matt Johnson, I want you to expect that I'm naming you as a defendant and Chief Beck as well. Chief Beck for the January 15th incident over at City Hall, and you for residing the meeting out on November 10th, when you should have just really took the people that was making the disturbance out of the meeting. That's what the Brown Act says. It's not a game no more. It's been happening. The way you run this meeting is unconstitutional. Everybody has the right to assemble, whether it's the front seat or the back seat. You guys have failed to do that. I'm gonna have a federal judge tell you guys that it's really okay for them to reside in the front, back seat, or wherever there's a seat available. You guys have been holding up these meetings. You guys have done everything. You know I have the legal ease for that. You know I sued not only Parks and Recreation, but Steve Rohde sued LA City Hall as well. I'm not joking anymore. I do have the legal ease, and it's not funny when you have to sit down and do depositions with me on this, and it's not a joke no more. Paperwork will be done next week. Chief Beck, what's the name? Hey, the city can't beat me. 4 in a row.
Michael Williams.
Good morning.
So it's interesting on the chief's report that he says that crime is increasing, but they're chipping away at it. That makes absolutely no sense. How can it be increasing, but you're decreasing it? That doesn't make any logical sense. Math, please. Chief Beck, the stats and all the things that you report are even more reasons why you should be fired. You are constantly inequipped to help this city. You are constantly defending the actions of your police, even though they don't deserve defending. You have no control over the crime in this city. Crime has gone up since you've been in office. You have no control of your officers shooting people. Officers involved shootings have been increasing since you've been in office. So what is the point of you being in office when you cannot control your officers, you cannot stop crime, you can't do any of those things? So you need to go. You are a detriment to our city. Under your leadership, our city has gone down. The lack of support for our communities have gone down. Instead of worrying about supporting your police and protecting them like the bulletproof vest on their chest, instead of worrying about that, this whole commission should be worrying about how are we going to build better communities? How are we going to build stronger communities? How are we going to build communities that are self-sustaining, that help themselves? How are we going to build communities that have jobs and education and things like that? Instead, you guys are sitting up here wasting almost 50% of the budget here in Los Angeles on police. Not on education, not on job development, not on public assets and resources. You are spending it on police. And again, the crime statistics, like it always does, shows that more police means more crime. Less police and better communities mean less crime.
The next 3 speakers, Ted Hayes, Melina Abdullah, and Paula Miner. I will restart it. Thank you.
Can you repeat the names again?
Ted Hayes, he's on his way up.
He's on his way. And who's after Mr. Hayes?
Melina Abdullah and Paula Miner.
I assume the person is being called out of order because I was one of the last people to sign up. And I don't want to get ahead of anyone. So can I get an understanding of how it is? I'm the last person to sign up. I'm called so quickly. Nevertheless, there's going to be a report on juvenile arrests. And I noticed in looking at it, pointed out that there have been some changes in the forms and the paperwork for that. And one of the things you do when you arrest a juvenile is you notify their guardian. And I'm surprised that the department has not moved to indicate that they're going to do something about collecting information on persons next of kin when they're booked. The county forms, sheriff's forms, don't have that information on it. And we had a situation where an in-custody death then took 4 days because there was no evidence of who the next of kin might be to be notified. But this department has said not one word about remedying that lack of information, a vital piece of information. Nothing has been said about that. So I don't know whether that's lethargy or inability to really think ahead of the game, so to speak. But really, Chief, it would be important for you to point out that you will, at some point, pursue the method of getting that information collected on arrestees. If not, that's irresponsible. And that's the thing I'm basically concerned about, that this department is still languishing, saying we have no idea who to notify when there's an in-custody death. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I did want to speak first to the chief's report and the BS that continues to be spewed by Charlie Beck. He does a great job of PR spin. And we understand that your public relations machine is very, very well funded. It's the kind of funding that provides officers with medals for not killing people, right? So we know last week an officer or 2 officers were given medals for not killing someone who was holding a fake gun in the middle of the street. That's not where we want our money invested. That's not where we want resources invested. We want you to stop killing people, period, right? Medals don't cut it. Medals don't cut it. PR spin doesn't cut it. We need to think about how people are constantly treated by these police. Even if this is an example of police sitting in the first 2 rows and then taking up the public seats and then telling us that we don't have the right to sit in their seats. Even if we think about how this building is gated off only on Tuesdays for police commission meeting. That's what your sergeant told us his orders are, to gate it off and make the public walk all the way around a block and a half in order to get in the back door of the building. So we know Charlie Beck is a lost cause. He is an apologist for killer police. He's even awarding medals of valor and pretending like there's something good about what the police are doing by the way in which they oppress and repress our neighborhoods. He's a lost cause and he needs to be fired. You need to be fired. Not in 2019 when your contract is up. You need to go right now. So the only people who can do anything, and we see that there's some shift happening, we need you to shift faster, is the police commission. You're supposed to represent us. So we know you have the power to fire him. So if the mayor won't do it, we need you to do it. We need you to move. We need you to get Killer Charlie out. Fire Charlie Beck.
Paula Miner.
I concur with much of what my colleagues, in fact, with all of what my colleagues have said. I did want to correct something, though, that was said earlier about the little confrontation when we came in regarding seating. It was not the commission president who de-escalated that issue. We did see Mr. Tafink go to the back and ask officers to move up front. So there are some reasonable people sitting up there, and we hope we can find more and more. Hopefully, with some of our shifts occurring, that things will change. But I do want to say Matt Johnson did not try to escalate. He tried to encourage some kind of confrontation with Dr. Abdullah. I also want to talk about what happened outside today, just so Chief Beck has facts, and it is on record. We spoke with Sergeant Leffey, Leffey, number 27058, who told us we could not enter from the front entrance. We asked him why, what was the procedure, policy, law. He said, as far as he knows, there is none, but he was told by his commanding officer not to let them in. His commanding officer is Captain Graham, and he is over the Central Patrol Division. So I think these things need to be on record because they occur any day of the week. I can walk into this police department. On Tuesday, if I look like I'm an activist or if I'm a person of color or if I look like I'm part of the community, I cannot. I'm told to go a block and a half around and enter from the back. Again, these are the kind of characteristics that you, Chief, pass on down to the police officers who result in the questionable shootings. When people are told, just do what I say. When people are told there are no other alternatives. So I agree, Chief Beck, you need to go.
Okay, we have no other comment cards. We have no other comment cards on this item. We're now on item number 3, regular agenda. We do have cards for all items except for D.
We're going to have a vote on D, so we'll just start with item 3A, please.
Okay. Item number 3A, Department's report dated August 26, 2016, relative to the Biased Policing and Mediation second quarter 2016 report.
Good morning, Commissioners. Commander Stuart Maisland, Commanding Officer of Internal Affairs Group.
Good morning.
This is our second quarter of 2016 report. It's not a report with second quarter data. It's actually year-to-date data for 2016, comparing it, of course, to prior years. Starting more or less at the beginning, when you look at the numbers of bias policing complaints so far this year and last year, you'll notice that 2015 and so far this year they look very much lower than previous years. 2015 has 211, and year-to-date 2016 97, which would project out to 194. But like what happens in 2014 and in prior years, this data is based upon complaint intake data. So complaints identified as bias policing complaints at the time of intake. And as complaints are investigated and they go through the process, then we learn that there are actually more bias policing complaints than we can identify at intake, because sometimes during the investigation of complaints that where a bias policing allegation isn't made at the beginning, it may be made later on. So I expect the numbers for 2015 and 2016 both to increase and more likely mirror those of 2014 and 2013 as it goes. Regarding the number of complaints broken down by bureau and by area, South Bureau continues to have a higher proportion of bias policing complaints than the percentage of residents, and Valley Bureau continues to have a lower proportion of complaints, of bias policing complaints, than the percentage of residents. But those numbers have been and are roughly similar to the 3-year average. When you look at complaints by area, Central and Pacific both have a higher percentage of complaints than the percentage of residents. In Central's case, it's lower than the 3-year average. And those are little anomalies when we look at those. But of course, when you look at Central and Pacific, they both have very large, daytime populations because of the downtown area and of course Venice Beach, which is unique to Pacific area. This quarter, 77th has a higher percentage and actually considerably higher percentage of complaints than the 3-year average. This quarter being 15.5, for this half of year, while the 3-year average is 4.7. And correspondingly, Southwest has a considerably lower percentage than the 3-year average, but it is roughly similar to the population. So the 3-year average for Southwest being 11, and this year being 6.2 so far. So there's really, I have no explanation for that, but it kind of bears watching to see if that holds true as the year progresses. It's also interesting that 2 areas had 0 complaints so far this year, that being Harbor and West LA. Now, both of those areas traditionally have very low numbers of bias policing complaints. I think it's 5.7 and 5.3 per year, respectively. But 0 for a half year is still stands out. So we're going to have to watch that and see if that holds true as the year progresses. Regarding accused employees by gender, ethnicity, age, and tenure, this year so far, actually females, the number of female accused officers has increased. And that's the first time that's happened. So it's gone up from 10% or almost 11% in 2014 and 2015. And females are now accused employees on 16.5% of the complaints.
How does that compare to their percentage of in the
still
apples to apples in patrol or in metro or in gangs?
That we haven't broken down, so that I don't have an answer for you. But that's something we can look at and something that we can do for the next report. I mean, it's still, females are still represented less than their representation on the department, or they're
Right.
accused less than their representation, but that's a question that we'll look at for the next quarter.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
As far as accused employee assignments, and you may recall we had a discussion in the last quarter where gang enforcement officers showed 0 complaints. Well, that's been made up for with the second quarter. So the first quarter appeared to be an anomaly, and now year to date, though, they're represented in 8.7% of the complaints. And nothing else really stands out as far as that goes. The most accused are patrol officers, and then after patrol officers, you have metro, traffic enforcement, and gang enforcement, because they're also overrepresented, and that's not really surprising because those employees engage in certainly the highest number of discretionary enforcement activities, and we would almost expect them to be the highest represented as far as being accused employees.
Now, we have far more officers in patrol than we do gang and metro, correct?
Yes, sir.
So, we would expect that number to be higher, but proportionally, is patrol higher than gangs and metro?
Higher than their representation. From the comparison group that we put together.
When I looked at it, it seemed to me that that in proportion to the number of officers in those divisions, that the number of complaints for gang enforcement officers and officers in metro were higher than patrol, which frankly doesn't surprise me given the nature of their assignments, and far more of their stops are observational in nature as opposed to a call for service. So I would hope that in terms of when we're rolling out our training, our anti-bias training,
yes,
that first of all, let's make sure I'm correct about that. If I'm not correct about that, then let's discuss. If I am correct about that, I would hope that those officers would be targeted for the training at a higher priority level than officers in patrol. And also, when you were going through the numbers earlier, it's obvious that the South Bureau, when you look at the proportion of officers to population, the proportion of complaints to population, it's far higher than every other bureau. So that should also be, that bureau should be prioritized for that training as well.
Understood, and we'll have to convey that to our training people. But I think from the fourth quarter report, I mean, we put that training on fair and impartial policing into almost every course that we teach, and it may be a little difficult to prioritize one bureau over another, or one area over another, or one type of assignment over another, unless there's specific training strictly on that topic. But that's something that we can convey to Police Sciences and Training Bureau.
Commissioner, if you're interested in this topic, which it appears you are, maybe we could have Dr. Pinnell come and this is a little bit outside of Commander Maislin's primary assignment, so maybe we could have our Director of Training come and talk a little bit about how we make determinations on training and who gets it and when.
I just wanted to add that while proportionally gang enforcement detail might receive a higher proportion of complaints, I do still think it's important that the higher volume of complaints comes from patrol, and also sort of the classic traffic stop and the perception that racial profiling occurs during those incidents. And as I've said this before, we've had this discussion before that many complaints I presume that are based on implicit bias, which is difficult to corroborate, and it's difficult to gather evidence on those kinds of things. And so as a result, I understand that in the end, most of these complaints might end up insufficient evidence to resolve or unresolved. So when I think about the issue, I think about the volume of the complaints, the initiation of the complaints, and it's difficult to understand where we need to address the problem, or how we should address the roots of the problem without an analyst to help us, distill the data. And because of the way implicit bias operates, it's difficult to know how to prevent the complaints in the future. But I think the volume of complaints needs to be continue to be paid attention to.
And that's what we do, and that's why we include this breakdown by accused employee assignments. And again, I mean, you're both correct. Clearly, the highest volume of complaints go to patrol officers, and that's the highest number of officers, and followed by traffic and gang enforcement and Metro, because they engage in the kind of police work that, for the most part, generates these types of complaints. So,
is the commander?
Can we have order, please? Can we have order, please?
Is Commander Maslin, are you done with your report? Are we in the commission question comment portion of this meeting, or?
Well, I have more I can provide, but I'm always certainly, it's your meeting. So
No. I actually do want to hear the report. Okay. The commander and Chief McCarthy took the extended me the courtesy of briefing me on the report a week or so ago, and so I have given a lot of thought about it and did have some comments, but I am interested in certainly the commander finishing his report, and and so I'll reserve my comment until then.
Okay, so as far as the type of law enforcement contact or encounter, that's been pretty consistent, but there's been one change for 2016, where previously it's always been traffic stops, traffic stops and then pedestrian stops have been consistently the two most highest types of contact, law enforcement contact or encounter, where these complaints have been made. With radio calls have been the third. Well, so far for this year, radio calls have actually jumped up and become the second behind traffic stops. So that's a little unusual. And as far as the discriminatory conduct alleged, that's been consistent throughout. If we're talking detention, arrests, and discourtesy being the three most common type of activity that folks are complaining about. And of course, as far as type of bias, ethnic bias far outweighs any other type of bias that's alleged. Ethnic representation of the complainants has also been consistent. Black males are far and away the most aggrieved parties, and they complain about the traffic and ped stops, and that the stop or arrest was based on ethnic bias. And while black complainants were the most numerous ethnic group, it declined in 2016. So prior years, 2014, it was 65%, 2015 is down to 60%, almost 61%. And so far, year to date, 2016, it's almost 55%. So it's gone down about 5%. And we'll have to see how that plays out for the rest of the year, but that is a little bit unusual. And of course, since 2014, black complainants have basically accused Hispanic or white employees in these complaints.
Ma'am, you've interrupted this meeting multiple times now. If you have a comment, please submit a card. You have, well, then reserve your comment for when you, and no one will interrupt you during your 2 minutes.
That's all you know how to do. Now, you want to see what the trouble is, go look in a damn mirror.
Okay.
That's not fair. She did all that, and you're not going to tell her she has one more.
She is leaving. She just left the meeting.
The white woman did all that, and I get one warning.
Can we have order, please?
Okay, so moving on, as far as the adjudication, again, just as a reminder, the adjudication of the complaints are based upon closed complaint data. So some of the complaints that were closed during 2016 most likely include complaints from 2015, 2014, and possibly some even as far back as 2013. Unfounded complaints are down this year from 83.5 3-year average to 74.6. Mediated is up, which is a good sign. The more complaints we can mediate, the better. And that was 10.5% of the complaints. And insufficient evidence to adjudicate it, not resolved, are up as well slightly from prior years. And yes, the elephant in the room is the number of sustained complaints, and during 2016 there have been 0 sustained allegations of bias policing. Reminding again, though, there were 2 allegations that were sustained by the Chief of Police in 2013, and those show in the not guilty category because of the findings of a Board of Rights. We added a new section. We did add a new section to the report this quarter on video, and it's actually on video and audio and how that's assisted in the adjudication of complaints. And 43 of the 121 closed complaints, there was actually, the adjudicator had access to video or audio, which assisted or could have assisted in the adjudication. Actually, 8 of those were closed as mediated, so we don't have data on that, but of the 35 of the 43 that were adjudicated had video or audio, and 28 or 80% of the 35 video or audio actually assisted in the adjudication. 26, it assisted in the adjudication of some allegations, and on 2 of them it actually disproved the entire complaint from the get-go. And all of those, both of those were digital in-car video, and of the 26 where it assisted, 20 were in-car video, 6 were other kinds of video that included cell phone video, city council video, or officers' personally owned audio or video recorders.
Sir, can you please stop disrupting the meeting? That's your first warning. If you continue to disrupt, I'm going to ask you to leave.
And as body-worn video, as we get back to installing body-worn video and instituting it throughout the department, I think we'll see more of that as well.
On the body-worn video, as it gets utilized, basically it'd be every officer. So every traffic stop, the body-worn video will be used, and pedestrian stops as well.
Yes.
Okay. And so the history. It's my turn.
Sir, you've interrupted the meeting multiple times now with the white headband. If you continue to disrupt, the next time I'm going to ask you to leave.
I'm not done. The history has been.
Okay, and again, for you, you've also interrupted the meeting multiple times now. If you interrupt again, I'm going to ask you to leave.
The history nationally and locally has been that the.
Thank you for leaving. Okay, can we have order, please? Commissioner.
So the history has been that the incidence of complaints have gone down substantially. In some places, in some areas, 50 and 50 and. It's my turn, sir.
Okay, sir. I gave you a warning earlier, sir. Now I'm asking you to leave. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did, sir. With the green hat, I'm asking you to leave. Sir, please leave.
So I'm going to go on now. That the numbers of complaints have dropped. I've seen up to 80%. So I think that it's really important that you continue to monitor these bias policing and mediation reports in relation to video, which is great. And as we roll out the body-worn video, I think my hope is that we're going to see really great results in this.
Thank you. So I have both some comments and actually a motion for the commission to consider. As I said, I very much appreciate the pre-briefing I had on the report, and also based on that briefing, understand that this kind of report has been presented to the commission in some form or fashion for some time now. And that the number of sustained complaints, particularly with respect to racial bias, has been at or near zero throughout the history of this kind of record keeping. It kind of may have gotten lost in the context of your report, but I do want to underscore my appreciation for the mediation program that's been established, and to indicate that at least I'm convinced that we should continue with that, and I sincerely hope that it grows in terms of participation. And also, to Steve's point, I certainly agree that we need to continue with this kind of report and tracking the nature of complaints, demographics, etc. That said, I certainly shared with you at the time and want to reiterate my concern that without a basis for comparison and some additional information, I think we continue to find ourselves at a place where there is a great deal of frustration and mistrust. Community members aren't convinced that we take bias seriously. And I don't really believe that anyone sitting in this room believes that our data captures the full extent of inappropriate or biased encounters. I want to say that I am not suggesting that I have a perspective on what that number is. Just that we're not hitting the mark with the metrics that we're currently collecting. With that said, and in an effort to find a path forward, I think some additional information would be helpful for me, for the public, the department, and I anticipate for the commission itself. Therefore, I'd like to submit the following motion for consideration by my colleagues, and I'm going to read it just to make sure that I capture it all.
We do have 9 public comment cards before the motion.
So then I will
Well,
refrain.
her motion is different than the motion on the report, so can we take, do we need to hold that motion?
We can hold the motion, and I was going to say, and.
Can you read the motion now, and then we can just hold the vote? So why don't you read the
can I do
motion
that?
now, and we'll hold the vote.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I was going to say, as a general matter, I appreciate public comment and think that it's an important part of the feedback loop for decision making. So thank you for that. First, I would like a report from the department for the years 2011 through 2015, which contains the following information from departments I'll mention in a moment, and also the LAPD. The definition of bias policing or racial profiling of that agency, the number of complaints, and of those complaints, the number that were sustained, not resolved or unfounded, the demographics of the city's population, and the number of officers with that department. And the comparison departments would be Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Dallas, and Baltimore. I think this will provide us with some data to ascertain how we compare to other departments. Second, I'd like to understand how the recruitment process that how through the recruitment process we're attempting to identify any bias that a candidate may have. Third, in conjunction with this report, I'm requesting a presentation on what our recruit officers are instructed on in the police academy relative to anti-bias, bias policing, and implicit bias. I would like to also have included in that presentation the number of hours for this type of training. Fourth, and this is related to implicit bias training, it's my understanding that the department has received training in, quote, train the trainer for implicit bias. I'd like the status of rolling out that training and the number of officers who've been trained to date, what the strategy is to provide the training, and when all of the department's sworn personnel will be trained. I'm also requesting that when the information that I've requested comes back to this commission, that it's presented all at one time and be agendized in such a way that we can have a robust discussion on the topic and that it be the only item on our agenda. My goal here is to get us beyond the limitations which seem obvious of relying on a single metric, that is to say, just the numbers captured in your report. I want to ensure that the public and officers, that as a department, we're selecting the best people to be police officers, providing the best training to our recruits and police officers throughout their careers, and that our supervisors and managers are doing all they can to provide leadership to ensure that bias doesn't occur. Since this matter is of both importance and keen interest, I'm requesting that these reports be scheduled for our commission meeting of November 1st. And would like to request that the executive director investigate the potential of holding this meeting in an environment or in a public space, room, that will accommodate better the members of the public that are interested in this topic. Finally, and just as an aside, I do want to say this. The subject or topic of bias is incredibly important throughout our society, both as it relates to how people of color are treated, but in order to have that conversation in a meaningful way, we all have to be sensitive to not reflecting the very behavior that we want to stand against. And while I take the matter incredibly seriously and very much want and intend, with the support of the commission, to promote a real and meaningful dialogue that can serve as the basis for real and meaningful policy making, I do not, under any circumstances, want to support, signify, or to have anyone believe that I would co-sign that the members of this department writ large are inherently biased or show up to work for any reason other than to do the very best job they can protecting this city. We all have issues, and we've got to be prepared to work on them together and prepared to engage them in a respectful manner that reflects our willingness to self-correct, even as we ask others to correct. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we're not going to vote on this motion now, but there's actually another piece of information I would like to add. When you're looking at those other cities, I'd like to do a comparison to their complaint receiving and adjudicating processes. I know, obviously, we have a pretty robust system here that resulted out of the consent decree. I'm not sure that I'd be curious to see if there's anything to learn from any of these other departments, or if what they're doing differently in comparison to us.
Commissioner, if I could add, I think that the list of cities is good, and we will certainly look at all those cities. I don't know that all of them have a bias policing complaint intake process, so if we could also indulge the commission, we'll try to find some cities that do, and we'll include them in addition, not instead of.
Great. So November 1st is the date you requested. Is 6 weeks a reasonable period of time for you to get this amount of information from all of these participating cities?
From the other cities, well, that depends on them, I guess. I mean, we will do our best and give you an update. We'll go through Mr. Teefank and provide an update on where we stand.
Let's do everything we can to have this on the November.
And of course, there are. And there are other entities. I was going to say there are other entities involved in providing some of the information when we're talking recruitment. I mean, we obviously are involved with recruitment along with the personnel department and the selection process.
Yep.
You know, there are personnel department input that we're going to have to get and to provide all of that on backgrounds as well. So it's not just an internal affairs report. It's way beyond us.
No, I appreciate that it'll require more than just your department, but I suspect that the department can pull it together.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can get the personnel department to participate in the presentation as well.
Yes.
You want to call the how many speakers do we have?
We have 10 comment cards. The first 5, Prentice Jenkins, Jamie Garcia, Angela James, Michael Novick, and Hamid Khan.
Prentice Jenkins, published the City Life newsletter, activist since 1991. Thank you, Ms. McLean Hill, for your kind words. That's exactly what we need. I know for a fact that there are individuals on this board who are trying to create a bridge between the community and the police, and they're working towards it. I understand bias in policing, because you know, I'm from Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. I got here in '85, and all I know is there were only 2 types of people in Missouri, black and white. So when I got out here, you can imagine the culture shock. And I'm riding on a bus with a friend of mine, another black friend. I asked, "What's that writing on the building?" He said, "What writing?" "That writing on the building." He said, "That's Spanish." I said, "What's Spanish?" I had no idea what Spanish was. That's the God's honest truth. And I was on a bus probably with a significant number of Spanish-speaking people. I didn't realize they were speaking Spanish. That was my bias. I had no idea that other people existed besides black and white people. I had never seen a mountain before. So you can imagine my awe when I first saw mountains. Missouri is all flat land. I had never seen the ocean before. Missouri didn't even have a lake. So bias police, and when you talk about bias, we all have our biases. We all have our biases. Last night, I came across on Broadway and 7th Street. I was on my bicycle. I had my camera on my bicycle, and I came across police officers who were actually, they had a black gentleman up on the wall, and they were searching. These officers were very professional, and I videotaped them. One of them noticed me and said, you look different without your suit on. I do.
Jamie Garcia.
Good morning. So it's impossible to believe that once again we stand in front of the Police Commission completely ignored, dismissed, and deemed a community of liars. So as the statistics show, since 2013, there have been 1,517 bias policing allegations with 0 sustained. How is that possible? You know, I wanted to talk about a critical investigation that needs to happen, and I see here that Ms. Cynthia McLean-Hill, that you're kind of asking for that. And in some ways, I saw the community be very appreciative of that, and in some ways, I was listening and thinking that, you know, this is what we've been wanting. But one critical thing that I think you missed, and one critical thing that I want to repeat that you said, is that you believe that officers don't show up here with bias, with the intention to be biased. I don't believe that. I mean, the history of policing shows that it came from slave catchers. It came from people that wanted to catch people who wanted freedom. So this is the history, and this is the structure of policing. This is how the policing has evolved itself. And when we look at programs like predictive policing, many scholars, and we don't have to list all the scholars, we don't have to get into those details, but it's proven that people of color come into contact police more often. So that is proven. So, you know, we have all these bias policing complaints. I do believe that police officers come with their bias, and I don't think that can be untaught, because they're in a structure that encourages it. So we look at predictive policing, we look at how neighborhoods, this historic crime data goes into these algorithms, spits out police officers to show up into the same places, to create data that shows, again, that that's where crime's gonna be. You have Operation Laser, where they're creating hit lists on people that have been in contact with police, and we know that who has been in contact police are people of color, yet these algorithms send them back to the same people, This structure is flawed by design. Police show up here and are promoted and are encouraged to be racially biased. They're encouraged to be in the same neighborhoods.
Who's next?
So that point that you made is critically
Angela
wrong.
James.
Who's next?
Angela James.
That's your last warning. That's your last warning. It's first and last, and you're first and last. Go ahead. Trying to have a meeting here. Go ahead.
Thank you. We live in a segregated city, so many of these numbers are not a surprise. It appears from the numbers that the places in the city where black and brown people live are not only most heavily policed, but generate a great number of the complaints that are thereafter disregarded. As a person that uses numbers, a statistician, demographer, I was really, really dismayed to hear the presentation this morning, as well as earlier presentation of data. One, because there's no explanation of what the comparison group are. Percentages are only useful when you tell us what the percentage, what it's being percentage upon. Thereafter, the interpretation of the data is absolutely dismaying. It should absolutely come as a surprise that people patrolling and that people on gang detail generate hugely high numbers of discrimination complaints. Actually, I'm dismayed to hear that any category seems to be dismissed in our understanding of a very real problem. I find it astonishing that the commentary on the numbers look over time and seem to applaud any minute decline. In the face of every year 0 sustained complaints, we should expect declines in complaints because they apparently do nothing, go nowhere. You are facing a crisis. Your legitimacy is sinking and has sunk. What we know is that you are only able to police and govern with the consent of the people. Read the Bill of Rights.
Michael Novick.
Michael Novick with White People for Black Lives. Earlier this morning, Charlie Beck cried some crocodile tears about Stanley Scheinbaum, who doesn't deserve to be mentioned by a man of Charlie Beck's character. Stanley Scheinbaum was a lifelong progressive and civil libertarian who opposed LAPD spying in an era when the LAPD was spying on the city council and on the board members of the Board of Police Commissioners, and in particular infiltrating and harassing police accountability organizations like the Coalition Against Police Abuse, led by Michael Zinzin, who was driven to an early grave because he was training the community in how to file complaints and demand satisfaction and track officers from one department to another, victim of police abuse by Pasadena, by L.A. The city had to pay out millions of dollars for what they did to him. I want to point out to you that the problem of so-called bias policing, I'm glad that Commissioner Kim and Commissioner McLean-Hill actually used the words racial profiling, which bias policing is a euphemism to try to avoid dealing with that reality. But racism is embedded in the department. It's not a matter of the biases of individual officers. You're talking about a system of policing which is based on and embedded in systematic political, economic, and social system of white supremacy and the protection of concentrated capital, and the police are designed to do that. The police are designed to act as an occupying army in communities of color and as an internal border guard in more privileged areas to keep people of color out of those areas. And if you think that you can deal with that by training individual officers to examine their own individual personal biases, you have you have to think again. Because it's not a problem of the individual officers, many of whom I'm sure are fine, upstanding, good-hearted people, but they're trapped in a system that designs them to carry out a system of law enforcement which is designed to send people to prison, and the killings are the tip of the iceberg of a systematic stop and frisk and racial profiling policy.
And the issue that they raised was that it's not a matter of what race you belong to. And I think my colleagues have already lifted this issue. It's the institutional prerogative that requires you to conduct yourself in a particular way. So it's the uniform blue that it points to. It's the institutional prerogative which requires you to act in a certain way. If the institution is fundamentally flawed by design, if the institution create conditions that is going to lead to bias, if the institution promotes practices where when contact is made, it is made on the presumption of a person's criminality, then bias is going to happen. It will continue to happen. So, Ms. Hill, I mean, we can have a lot of reports, and I think this is something that my colleague Jamie Garcia was lifting as well, but unless we really have a comprehensive X-ray and MRI of this institution, we're going to go around in circles. Because and we will talk about it at the next agenda item as well, where suspicious activity reporting is one of the primary pieces of what has emerged over the last few years that is giving police extraordinary amount of power to engage in a biased way. But I think that is really, and if you really are serious about it, and I hope you are, because I see that there's a lot of hope and faith that is being placed in your leadership. So we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to really have a comprehensive review, because what we are seeing is also more recently that Bratton's legacy is being peeled, one layer at a time. Their own Inspector General came out in NYPD against broken windows practice, completely debunking that thing. That whole legacy is being peeled. Kathleen Kim and you used racial profiling. That is another legacy that Bill Bratton had.
Thank you for your comments.
That switched this whole language to bias policing. So that needs to come back into the jargon of policing as well. So these are just some of the suggestions we have. Thank you.
I have never heard a whole bunch of crock of shit report. Let me tell you why. Chief Daryl Gates says there was just an aberration when they beat Rodney King. A lot of these cops were hired by Chief Daryl Gates, so you can just eliminate that bullshit. A lot of these guys come from that tradition. I want to go back to L.A. City pays out a settlement to man in a KKK hood. I wonder why. I guess that was biased policing, arresting a guy in a KKK hood. Well, that should be on the agenda. Now, let me say, they did this again in 2016 for me walking in City Hall and knowing that they couldn't do it. Was that biased policing? No, that was a black man walking in the KKK outfit, and they just wanted to harass. Number two, if you really want to go back to the sign of it, they told me I couldn't make a report out there at the Pacific Division. I couldn't file a report. But a federal judge came back and awarded me 24 arrests, illegal arrests, in 2009 that had to go to the Ninth Circuit. I wonder why. I guess that's biased policing. That was a $264,000 settlement that cost the city another $3 million that triggered a whole bunch of more lawsuits from Stephen Rohde. Now, biased policing is, I guess, he doesn't have the actual report, because if you go pull my files over there, I filed about 20 of them myself, and they still sitting on the desk. I wonder why, because the color of my skin. It's a good thing that you want to pull the reports. Pull my reports, and you can see 20 reports of biased policing. They're still in internal affairs on the desk. Nothing has never been done. I'm Michael Hunt. I'm getting ready to sue you guys again, and that lawsuit that I'm getting ready to file will tell you and prove in federal court that they fuck up all the time.
Michael Williams, followed by Melina Abdullah.
I gotta stop starting my time like before I even get up to the
I will
podium.
restart it, sir.
One thing before I start my time, I wanted to ask a question of the
Time has started.
Your time is your time. We're not. Please ask your question.
Does the report show that the numbers of complaints that are reoccurring against certain officers? I think that's an important statistic, because if we see that certain officers have continued reports, then somehow these can't be all the reports can't be lies. Okay.
That information is tracked. It's not part of this report, but that information is tracked.
Okay. So it's not reported because, let me guess, the Peace Officers Bill of Rights? You said that that the complaints among black males has gone down from 65% to 55%. Don't you think because every year it's been zero sustained? Duh. Like, obviously, I'm not going to keep. That's the definition of insanity, to keep doing something that doesn't work. You know? So why would anybody keep giving complaints, especially as a black person who knows the history of policing in this country, who's been a part of biased policing? Why would I continue to put in a report that is judged, adjudicated, and decided on by the people I'm complaining against? Why would I do that? That makes no sense. This whole system makes no sense. So if you're actually going to do a bias report, how about you do a bias report with an independent auditor, someone who's a third-party organization, who is not a part of law enforcement, who can actually look at these numbers, look at the complaints without bias. Because you have bias in your findings. So how can you have a biased complaint report when you're biased?
Melina Abdullah, followed by Ted Hayes and Beth Kemp.
These numbers and the complaints themselves are audited by the Inspector General, who does not work for the police department. He works for the police commission. He is not a part of law enforcement. Okay, order, please. Order, please. Sir. Please.
Right. Okay.
Okay, can we please give the speaker her moment to at the mic, please?
So I appreciate Commissioner McLean Hill's motion. I think that it's an effort to reform the way that the commission operates. However, I think it's also important for us to understand the I don't know if that's a word, but I'll coin the phrase, laughability of the moment, right? That 0% of these are sustained, and then they want to point out in 2013, 2 were sustained. Even you all had to chuckle at that, right? I think more fundamental, and what Brother Michael and what Sister Angela both lifted up, is how few incidents are actually reported. And so I just want to tell my own story. I was quickly familiarized with LAPD when I moved here in the mid-90s for grad school. When I was walking by an incident and an officer grabbed me, handcuffed me, threw me on the front of the police car, and then threw me in the back, leaving the windows up. It was a hot day. Another officer walked by and saw me crying. I'm in my early 20s, saw me crying and asked what's wrong. And I told them I didn't know why I was in the car. The officer then went and talked with the officer who brutalized me and thrown me into the car and came back and goes, "Oh, you're the one who attacked the police officer." So I saw them corroborating and building a story against me. When they finally let me out the car, they asked me, "Would you like to file a complaint?" Hell no, I don't want to file a complaint because you just told me that you are all corroborating. You are all working together for a very corrupt system. This is the system that we live under. I teach. When I survey the class and we talk about police, I ask, how many of you have been harassed or brutalized by the police? Not a single person of color says that is not in their experience. Every single one of them has experienced that. So we need to get down to the fundamentals and realize this is not about bad apples. This is about a fundamentally flawed system. And the question is, are you all willing to do the hard work to transform the system, not just pretend that there's a few rogue officers?
Ted Hayes.
A definition of biased policing. Bias sounds like something Donald or Barry might say when they are talking about something being rigged. When I looked for the definition, the only thing I could find that the department might be suggesting it means was misconduct. Now, I would suggest that Roger's thesaurus would not associate misconduct with bias. I certainly don't believe those two words are compatible or related. Now, let me tell you about bias policing. The Internal Affairs Division is in the Bradbury Building on Broadway. I went in there to file a complaint. 2 officers were coming downstairs. They're upstairs, but they interview you downstairs in the hallway. Not in a room, but in the corridors of the hallway. Anyway, they were coming down the stairs, and the officer saw me, and he said, "You again?" And he turned around and went back upstairs. I never saw another officer that day. Now, that's biased policing, folks. Okay? So we have to recognize that, well, let me speak about myself for a moment, because I've been in internal affairs. I have filed so many complaints. Not one has been adjudicated as being correct. They never call me back to question me about the nature of my complaint and the incident. Never, ever. So internal affairs is a hoax. And if you think you can, as the gentleman said, if you keep complaining and complaining and complaining, recognizing the people who are going to adjudicate complaints are the very people you're complaining about, you're insane. So that's internal affairs. In the Bradbury Building, interviewing the people in the hallway, not in a room, not with a tape recorder, but in a hallway.
So when we want to talk about these reports that are being filed against police, we have to remember it it's not always easy to file these reports against the police. Why? Because the police are often breaking the law. They break at Section 83010 of the California State Penal Code, where they're not wearing their badge or ID. And when you ask them to follow the municipal code and give you a business card with their ID number on it, not their badge number, but their actual serial number, which is LA law, they refuse. They flat out refuse. And I have this on video. I have so much evidence against the police, it's disgusting. I've been beat, I've been harassed, and I know I'm not the only one. If you expect people to want to file reports against the police, then they have to have the information to do it. And honestly, when has calling the cops on the cops ever done anyone justice? Seriously. And I've been here for 6 years, and I've seen no justice in cases where people have been murdered, brutalized, run over, and we can't even get the information as to who the cops are. When you ask who the watch commander is, the cops say, I don't know. Well, it's your freaking job to know. You need to know who's in charge of you. Stop lying. Stop giving us bullshit, because we know it's all untrue, okay? We know that you just don't want to be held accountable for your actions, and that's a big problem. And I will take it upon myself to bring complaint forms to people and have them fill it out. And when they get ignored, we're going to have copies that we keep of these complaint forms to say, oh, well, it's still here. You can't throw it out of the file when this cop is being tried, or when this cop is, not like you ever get tried, but when this cop is being investigated, you might not have it in your files, but we'll have it in ours. Because you know what? We have to protect ourselves from you, because we've been given no other choice. We have to protect our communities, and we need to stop the madness, because if this commission cares, they're going to hold them accountable to the same rules as the public.
We have no other comment cards for this item.
Okay, thank you. So we have two motions. So first, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the department's report.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then we have a second motion to approve Commissioner McClain-Hill's motion as amended for a report back from the department related to this matter.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thank
The
you.
only thing that I would say is that we have a lot of business to do on November 1st, and to say that that meeting is canceled because of this, maybe we should have a special meeting. I mean, I don't mind going deep on any issue. I do mind taking all the rest of the process of the whole department, and just every time we got a whim that we want to go deep on something, of canceling a meeting.
So,
So I'd like to have a special meeting with that and leave our police commission meeting if we...
Well, we've already passed the motion, and the motion did indicate a November 1st comeback date. That's one. Two, and just hold on a second, couple things. Among the things that I do want to just speak to, there's a lot of energy, a lot of frustration, and a lot of, I think, genuine pain and concern being brought forward around a matter that we absolutely don't have our arms around. It undermines the relationship between this department and the community as it continues to go unaddressed. There really and truly has to be a way that we can move through this and to a place where both this community and this department are comfortable with where we are. And to the members of the public that are participating on this issue, again, while I'm not prepared to co-sign every word spoken at the microphone, I will say this. It's 2016. There's no one in this room that can lecture me about what progress looks like and how it takes and what it takes to get there. I respect and want to encourage continued participation in this process. It is always hard. It always requires people to stay engaged. In order for it to happen, it takes the collaboration of a whole lot of people, not all of whom necessarily like or agree with each other. So I respect the role you play. I encourage you and would hope that you respect the role that others play. To the commissioners, you know, we've got a lot of work to do to both support our officers and to engage in a real way with this community around this issue. So it seems to me that it is an enormously important use of our time, a single issue meeting, a meeting of this police commission, and importantly, a meeting in an environment that does not feel militarized and is open to more members of the public.
Okay, do we move to the next?
Yeah, we're saying the same thing. She's asking for a special meeting. I think it should be a special meeting. Period.
Order, please. Okay, can we have order, please, so we can get to the next item? We have a number of important items on the agenda today.
The next item, 3B, Inspector General's report dated September 9, 2016, relative to the review of suspicious activity reports 2015.
As in a little bit of a break with protocol, given the nature of this report, there's an organization, LAPD Stop Spying Coalition, that thank you, that are regular attendees of this commission and raise this issue. So as a part of the discussion today, I'm going to give them 15 minutes to present on this item. Before we take public comment, we will take public comment as usual after that. But we'll start, of course, with the Inspector General's report.
Good morning, President Johnson, members of the Commission.
Good morning.
The Office of the Inspector General conducted its third review of the Los Angeles Police Department's system for collecting suspicious activity reports. These reports were initiated at the request of the federal government in response to the 9/11 attacks, and through two policy changes that have occurred since 2004, the LAPD has refined its process of collecting the SARs. What criteria is used to collect the SARs, how they are stored, and our job is to monitor the SARs that the department stores. I'll preface what's not in the report, but I will tell you is that we recognize the history of the community concern about this topic. It dates back to prior conduct by the Los Angeles Police Department decades ago in maintaining files that didn't have a basis. So while I'd like to say that I think we're very thorough in all of the reports and audits that we engage in, this one probably gets as much scrutiny as any that we do. We dedicate at least one investigator to read each and every SAR that is collected. That investigator engages with his supervisor, who engages with me. When we finish our analysis, we engage continually with the members of the Major Crimes Division. The commanding officer of that division, we've had protracted meetings. We've had vigorous discussions. This particular year, we found that the department was 100% in compliance, which means, in our opinion...
Can we have order, please?
It means that, in our opinion, each of the SARs that were collected was based on one of 16 specific and very well-defined criteria that initially are created by the federal government and have been adopted in department policy. But I will tell you, in past meetings, last year, for example, we probably had a 45-minute discussion that concerned what we believed was a First Amendment issue, where a member in the back of a taxi cab was espousing support for ISIS. The brutal behavior that they were engaged in, it scared the taxi driver. He called the police. And our position in that case was that was not a SAR because it was not one of the 16 specific criteria. And that was about a 45-minute discussion because we understood the police officer's position. It's unusual behavior. It scared the taxi driver. He called the police. It's worthy of police to look at it. But I offer that just to give you an idea. I can't convey to you or to the audience how seriously we take this, but I at least wanted to give you one example of the depth to which we look at these. We spend a lot of time on this. We recognize it's a very serious issue. we scrutinize each one of this year 246 SAR reports that were collected. The majority of the SAR reports come about by citizens who participate in the See Something, Say Something program. And while there may be concern about that, if you watch the 9/11 memorials that occurred on Sunday, as I did, the one in New York featured Homeland Secretary Jay Johnson talking about how our nation is well prepared to address the types of attacks that led to 9/11, where foreign countries were directing activity within the country, but that today's threat is more from the lone wolf. And for communities to be able to respond to that, all levels of government are highly dependent on members of the community being involved, because those are the people who are most likely to have information about lone wolves. So that is the context with which we do our analysis. I will tell you that the area that we most focus on, that we're most concerned, of the 246 SARs, 44 led to contact between police officers and members of the community. We review each one of those to determine if there is a constitutional basis if the officers engage in a detention. In our opinion, each of those engagements was conducted consistent with policy, department policy. And that is why, for the first time in our review of SARs, we find the department collection of SARs to be completely compliant with department policy.
Excuse me. If you have a comment, submit a card. If you disrupt again, I'm going to ask you to leave. Are you finished?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I had two questions. You identified that that SARs were scanned into ICARs, and that practice has ended.
That's correct.
And what about the SARs that had previously been scanned? Have they been destroyed, or are they permanently in there? What's happening with those?
They will be put on the same schedule for destruction as the actual paper SARs, which I believe it's 2 years of holding at the source of origin and 3 years held in the Iron Mountain is the private contractor, the off-site storage location, so ultimately 5 years before those are disposed of.
Okay.
The digital SARs will be destroyed in the same manner.
Okay, so they will be destroyed.
Yes.
This has been a topic in previous report from the Inspector General regarding SARs, but would you like to make a comment about how it was determined whether or not bias policing or race or ethnic bias, any incidents of that in your investigation with respect to the SARs, and how that broke down?
As you see from the charts that we present, the ethnicity, and believe me, we're relying on the people who call about SARs. As I mentioned at the outset, the majority of SARs are collected by community members. And oftentimes, officers don't have access to those community members who initiated the SAR complaint. So the department and we rely on those community members' depiction of the race or ethnicity of the involved persons. We certainly noted that the persons classified, defined, identified as Middle Eastern were the largest component. And there's a small Middle Eastern community in Los Angeles, really not even represented if you check city demographics. So certainly the number in SARs far outstrips, from a representational basis, what you would expect to find in the community. We can only presume that that is a community response to incidents that included the San Bernardino terrorist attack and the Paris terrorist attack. You'll notice we talked about the fact that in December, the department collected the largest number of SARs, and that was directly after the San Bernardino terrorist attacks. Similarly, the next highest spike was, I believe it was early in the year after the Paris attacks. So my presumption, and I don't have any basis for this because the information is not available to us, but my presumption is that the community and probably police officers are reacting to those attacks. But nonetheless, even if those concerns provoke an emotional response and sometimes lead to a SAR that is well-meaning, a SAR can be unfounded if it doesn't meet the criteria. That doesn't mean a citizen was bad in calling the police and expressing concern about what they believe to be suspicious activity. That's what we're asking citizens to do, and citizens have different levels of what their comfort is. But our job, the department's job, and our job secondarily is to say, even when those concerns are expressed, is the defined conduct meeting one of these 16 standards? If it's not, that's when the SAR is properly unfounded out of the system.
And if I can add a little bit, Commissioner, to that, as far as the bias analysis that we do. So, for example, if you look at this report, you had 63 SARS against Middle Eastern individuals. Put in the context of the amount of citizens in the Los Angeles area, 4 million. And although it may not be statistically significant because a very small portion of that doesn't stop our analysis. Because if there's one and it's wrong, even if it's not statistically significant, it's still significant to us. So we will look through each one of those cases to see how the contact, if any, was made, whether there were any constitutional issues, whether there was any problem whatsoever with the manner of police operations in that particular area. And we examine it not just for bias, but anything that we think was inappropriate, to department training, to tactics, to anything that we identify. And what we will do if we find some, and we have in the past, is we will immediately engage with Chief Downing and his team, and we'll start working through it. And we've had the ability to tighten up the process. So I think our analysis, just to be clear, is it's 2 steps. You know, we will look to see if there's any statistical evidence of bias or anything else untoward in the community, but we don't stop there. We will look at the individual cases to see if there is a case or a pattern of cases that demonstrate that there were any issues whatsoever with the police's conduct in this area. And that's what we engage in, and that's what Kevin Rogan's team actually analyzed.
I understand. I understand that SARs are generated by community members, and I would ask for you to also comment on how then, I mean, you've stated a little bit about the categories, the criteria for SARs, but it would be helpful if you can make another comment about how then the department vets those community reports to determine beyond the criteria of whether something fits into a SAR.
The analysis
that would help to understand whether or not the ethnic or race bias is taking place.
I think I'll try to answer your question. You can tell me if I'm
community members. You know, it's different from
sure.
Departmental.
In many cases, the department simply has to take the report as reported by community members. Community members can report directly to officers or through 9/11, where they're actually talking to officers, and there may be the opportunity for contact. But they can also, they being community members, can also report a SAR through iWatch LA, through the app, or through the 800 line. And oftentimes in those instances, there is no opportunity for follow-up. So the department will accept the community member's report of a suspicious activity. The person who gets that document, passes it up through the watch commanders who forward it to Major Crimes Division. That's where the analysis occurs. Those persons, the officers of major crimes, they're the ones who are tasked with saying, okay, this has been described. Does it match one of the 16 categories? If somebody was taking pictures of a building, what makes that suspicious beyond just taking the picture? That's the very type of discussion that we've had, because there have been cases where the information is so bare. Someone taking pictures of a building, tell me something about the building, because I believe, I don't have they're in the appendix, but I believe the buildings are buildings of note or of tactical concern. For example, maybe a communications building in the city of Los Angeles. So those are the types of things that we expect the officers of major crimes to do. That's in our analysis this year. They actually did do that to the level of not making any errors of analysis. We agreed with all of their analysis. And I think they've done a great job on their own getting there, but I also say that we've been very engaged in asking them to refine that level of analysis over the last 2 times that we've reviewed this SAR program, to ask those additional questions of, is it one of the 16 behaviors or actions barely, or is there sufficient extra information to make that nexus to why is photographing suspicious? Somebody photographing a water source, okay. Somebody after hours photographing a water source and a community member thought that's unusual, that may be sufficient enough. If somebody's in a park taking pictures, but by their dress or their skin color, well, okay, is there any tactical interest in the park? Was there anything going on in the park? It's just people in a park? Those are the kind of discussions we would say, gee, in our opinion, that doesn't comport with your definition and policy of what you're asking your police officers to rule as a founded SAR. A community member may have submitted the SAR, but a police officer is the one who's going to have to found it and send it forward.
what percentage are founded and unfounded? And those initial contacts. Well, somebody's taking pictures in a park and they're wearing a certain garb.
Over half of the SARs were unfounded this time. The number is 139 were unfounded and 107 were founded.
So the officers say that's not enough. We're not even taking that forward.
Correct.
Good.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I had two other questions. One is just a clarification. There was a sentence I just didn't understand. In the section under officer-initiated SARs,
Okay.
it's right before the chart right before table number 3. There's a sentence that says none of the 44 contacts were initiated based on the behavior or activity subsequently reported on the associated SAR. I didn't understand what that meant.
What we found is that officers were either responding to radio calls or making contacts with persons based on reasonable suspicion or consent. Any one of those are acceptable levels of conduct as defined in department policy. And while subsequently engaged in that contact, the officer identified something that they thought was reportable as a SAR, a comment that somebody would make. Several of the contacts involve sovereign citizens. So a traffic stop has been conducted. The officer subsequently identifies a driver who, through their type of ID that they attempt to use, through their comments, identifies himself as a sovereign citizen. The officer who did the traffic stop then reports that as a suspicious activity, and that meets one of the 16 criteria. So the initial contact was properly conducted as a detention based on a possible violation of traffic code, and then subsequently reported as a SAR. There are also cases where officers, I know one case was a domestic violence case, one case was a mental illness 5150 evaluation, and the officer subsequently learned information that they thought met one of the 16 criteria, so they filled out the SAR and forwarded to major crimes.
Got it.
But the important part, again, is that SAR is a lower level than even reasonable suspicion, than the reason that police can legally detain somebody. So that would be difficult. If people were being detained just on SAR issues, that type of detention would not be appropriate. It's not what policy defines, but we didn't find that. So fortunately, we didn't have to make any of those types of analysis. They were the product of other contacts.
Yeah, I just have a question about record keeping and data as it relates, that's generated as it relates to a SARS report. So could you again underscore, because you indicated that about 50% of the reports coming in from the community, for instance, are unfounded. So can you tell me again slowly what happens at the intake process? Assuming that a report is determined to be unfounded, what happens with that data or information? How long is it kept? Where is it kept? And that sort of thing.
I can. At least I think I can. The original SAR usually originates one of the department's 21 areas around the city. That SAR is forwarded. Let's presume that it's a paper SAR. And I've mentioned there are other ways that SARs can come in through the iWatch, but I'll just stick with this for simplicity. The paper SAR is first collected by a line officer. It's then submitted to a watch commander for a basic level of review. They're not experts or expected to be expert in the 16 criteria. That's just to see is the form completed properly as the officer is directed to do in policy. All of those forms are then forwarded to Major Crimes Division. Major Crimes then will enter the information into their Palantir database. That's the name of the database. And they'll make an analysis on, is this information sufficient to be affirmed? Is it one of those 16 areas? And if it is, the affirmed SARs are sent to the Joint Regional Intelligence Center. But you asked more about the unfounded ones. The unfounded SARs, there are two copies. There is a working copy that is kept at the Major Crimes Division. That's usually the original. And a copy of that is sent to Records and Records and Identification Division, because a DR number was generated. In both cases, those unfounded SARs are kept in locked cabinets to which a limited number, I believe the number of people is 4. It's in our report. I'll have to refer to that to tell you precisely. But a very limited number of people have access to those actual documents at all, and they require supervisory approval to go and open those cabinets. After a 2-year period of being kept on site, the reports are shipped off-site to a contract facility. Iron Mountain is our local contract facility. And while I'm not an expert on detention, on records retention, I believe the reason for the time is because of state and or federal law requiring how long police investigation reports must be retained. I don't believe the department has the discretion to destroy those reports any sooner than they do.
So are you indicating that there isn't a database or a system that's accessible by anyone other than the folks who have access to the locked paper copies of SARS reports that are ultimately unfounded?
If an unfounded SAR does not include any information about an involved person, it includes an activity done by somebody took pictures of a communication building in LA. That information is retained in the Palantir database, which is accessible only by specified members of Major Crimes Division. It's not accessible department-wide. And that information is blind because it doesn't name a person. If a named person, if an identified person is listed on a SAR and that SAR is unfounded, the identifying information is removed from the SAR. The date, time, type of activity is retained in Palantir, but none of the information about the person.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. We'd like to bring up the part. There's no, Mr. Khan, if you.
No.
And commissioners, if you access your green icon with the E, you'll be able to view the presentation on yours.
Just turn around.
You have to clear out of everything that. Was that it?
I got it. So we can, without, even though we're not looking at it, we have it on these, okay?
But it's,
Gonna wait till it comes up.
Did you go to this one?
It's the green one right there, man.
Green one right there, man.
It's a conspiracy. You broke it. You broke it.
Not personal, mine's not working either.
Every other one works.
You can use mine, man. You can use mine.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get started because there's much to cover, and it's very interesting sitting back there listening to the Office of Inspector General gloss over some very critical information where it states directly into their suspicious activity report. But before I get started, I just hope that the commissioners on this panel just would walk with us for a little bit and just pay attention and absorb this information and look at this information not just in the context of numericals and numbers, but what does it mean on a much deeper level impact on the community? That how a community that is constantly being surveilled and how communities who have a history of being surveilled, how these programs are now increasingly being codified and incorporated into local policing. We just had past 9/11, the 15th anniversary, and we always remember that historically speaking and currently that how these incidents create a crisis in the country, and then how police powers expand. So this is how I would like for you to look at this thing, that this is a program that has dramatically expanded police powers. And for the lawyers in the room, I would really appreciate it if you could just think a little deeply when I go through this PowerPoint. Let me just get this thing started. Okay, just a quick short history lesson that what is the history of SARS. So in 2004, Congress passed the Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act. That came on the heels of the 9/11 Commission report. And one of the mandates in that 2004 Act was for the executive branch, for the president to create an information sharing environment. Basically, a much bigger umbrella information sharing where information can be gathered, it can be stored and shared on multiple levels, both on a horizontal level and on a vertical level between local law enforcement agencies and between vertical, federal, and other regional agencies as well. The National SAR initiative began in 2008, and so one of the primary tactics that the LAPD uses, and which is increasingly becoming a part and parcel of domestic policing, is intelligence-led policing. And you have law enforcement officers over here, so they can weigh in if we are not sharing the correct information. And in essence, what intelligence-led policing does is that it collects information, it processes and analyzes information, and then it shares and disseminates information to other agencies. So that's basically the tool that they use. In the SAR program, and this is where really the heart of the whole issue lies, that the suspicious activity, and my understanding is, Ms. Hill, that you're a lawyer as well. So looking at the definition of suspicious activity, it defines it as observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning related to terrorism or criminal activity. So when you break it down, what they're saying is that a person's behavior is being observed, and it reasonably indicates that a person may be thinking of doing something wrong. So in essence, what we are doing is we are legitimizing speculative policing now. We are legitimizing hunches that, okay, I'm observing somebody's behavior. That reasonably indicates to me we're not talking about probable cause, we're not talking about other standards, we're talking about reasonable indication, which is completely a vague and an unprecedented standard. So that's really the first problem with this thing. Then when you look at
officers to, if they don't see something or be able to ask you questions during the, is that what you asked? That they could ask you questions during
they can ask you, they can observe you, they can do
ask you questions about your presentation during, did you ask? I just wondered if you asked, did you invite that or you did not invite him?
He didn't invite that.
Oh, I'm just asking. No, I know I wanted to, but I didn't know. You can have the time.
I started the clock late.
Did we invite the officers? So that's okay. Just repeat the question because
I thought I heard you say that if any of the officers feel like there's something here as they're going along with it, that they don't.
No, I said that making sure that this information is correct. So if there's any objection to this information, so please speak up as well, because what we are dealing with is
But I think we should let
no,
him
I
have,
agree.
let him
I
have
agree
15
with that.
minutes
I
to
just
give
wonder
his
what he said. Yeah.
presentation, and
Okay.
then-
Give him his time.
He's got
I don't
another
care.
minute.
That's okay.
Take your time.
So breaking it down again, we're looking at behavioral surveillance and reasonable indication as the two key standards that are here. So please just make a marker of that. Now, when you look at the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program itself, it was launched in March of 2008 under Special Order 11, where certain activities were outlined, and these are the activities amongst many other activities. There were criminal activities as well, but they were non-criminal behaviors, taking pictures, taking videos, using binoculars, drawing diagrams, taking notes, walking into an office. Now, the language they use is something different, implied threat, this, that, and the other, but these are behaviors and actions which are very much protected by the Constitution. Then in January 2012, the Special Order 11 was revised. It became Special Order 1. And then in August 2012, it was further revised and became Special Order 17. Also along with that, in October 2009, the LAPD launched a companion program called the iWatch See Something, Say Something program, basically aggressively promoting community and neighborhood involvement in reporting suspicious activity. Now remember, think about the unfounded SARS and think about the definition of suspicious activity, observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning. So this is what is going on. Which brings me to the next point, that anytime we speak of a policy, it cannot be seen in isolation. It has to be seen as a part and parcel of a much bigger program as well. This is what we know of. This is what we have identified through Public Records Act. This is what we have found out through research. This is what we have found out about how large the architecture of LAPD surveillance is. And it's not this is the information that we know. We don't know what else is missing. So when you look at the circle, you have the SAR program, you have the iWatch program, you have the ATIS intelligence gathering guidelines, according to which they can plant informants based on a tip for 6 months. They can also take on fictitious personas and fake identities, which from our vantage point is clear entrapment that is taking place. They have predictive policing, which is based upon, and that is a whole issue that we need to come back and talk about it, that where this policing is going, what that is doing. They have the trapwire technology. This is the documentation we found out through Public Records Act, which basically picks up your body image and submit and sends that image to the fusion centers.
Mr. Khan, I understand the scope of your report, but you have to recognize that the scope of the presentation was simply the SARS report by the IG's office.
This is what I'm doing.
Hold on.
No, your report.
Please let the city attorney. Let the city attorney speak.
Right. Your report goes beyond what was presented. I'm just calling that to your attention because.
So let's do this. Let's do this. Hold on, please. I assume the rest of your presentation is mostly about the SARS program, not about the subject matter of the report, correct? Okay, so ma'am, please, since it was not properly agendized, it's not appropriate for this meeting, but I will agendize it, I will agendize it for a future meeting. We'll have the department present on this, and I will give you your 15 minutes to present on this at that time. So we can actually. I'm deferring to the city attorney on this of whether
this is simply a SARS report. The policy.
Just a minute. Look at the previous 5 or 6 slides. Is this not SAR? 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 Is this not SAR?
Mr. Khan, I encourage you to take my offer to have this agendized and give you another opportunity to present it.
All right, let's move on. Let's move on. I mean, this is what happens when people are exposed and busted. So let's move on. That for a later time. Just wanted to show that how it fits into the larger architecture of surveillance. This is how information is gathered, and the person from the Inspector General office just shared that with you, that how information, a file is opened, a file is then sent to the Major Crimes Division, from where an assessment is made, and that assessment is sent to the Joint Regional Intelligence Center or Fusion Center, where from there it is uploaded into the information sharing environment in the Fusion Center, and from there it is then shared with 18,000 local law enforcement agencies, with private contractors, with every federal agency. The Government Accountability Office released a report in March 2013 that 300 Department of Defense entities gather information from this over here, and there's a whole realm of private contractors that have access to this information as well. So now a mere act of taking photograph, your whole being is being circulated around the world in the cyberspace. Am I sticking with the SAR program? Sure. Yeah, shake your head.
Okay.
Shake your head. Yeah. This is what the fusion centers are. They basically collect information. There's about 85 fusion centers or so around the country. The one in Norwalk is one of the largest fusion centers. And when a SAR has been uploaded in the fusion center, it is sent. And one of the things that came out of the Government Accountability Office was that in the report, that even if a SAR is unfounded by the fusion center, the FBI still gets to keep it for 30 years. So just follow the pattern. Just follow the pattern. And this is all in the Government Accountability Office. This has all been documented. So it's not just the unfounded at the department. The Fusion Center also declares them unfounded as well. And we also have some documents from LAPD itself that out of the SARs that LAPD, about 2,600 they had sent in 2011 or so, and continuing to send them, only 64 were founded by the Fusion Center to begin with. So now all these names are being gathered and going into these secret files, and we'll get to Chief Beck's comment as to when he says that we're not secret. So in essence, everyone is a suspect. This is what this thing says. Now, what are the community concerns? And I'll get to the audits after this, that it creates a culture of fear and suspicion. because the messaging that is going out is that there's an other around you who's dangerous, who's suspicious, and even if the other is engaging in a constitutionally protected activity, keep an eye on them because they may be able to thinking of pre-operational surveillance that it may reasonably indicate to you. It basically reinforces social biases. You spoke about racial profiling. You spoke about the numbers. He talked about the December attacks. We'll go back to 2013 and 2015 audits as well and see what kind of attacks led to racial profiling in that, because there's a whole history behind that. Of course, it invades privacy. But for us, privacy obviously is the domain of the very privileged as well, because many of our communities have never had privacy. Our bodies are bared. So privacy is an important issue, but it's really fundamentally a civil and a human rights issue. This is what the U.S. Senate had to say about a Fusion Center intelligence gathering. This is a report that was released in October of 2010. This is something that the Fusion Center came back, and I would like to point out to this report as well. This is the Center's Fusion Center report. And if you look at this Fusion Center report, and you don't have to go very far. If you look at basically just the table of contents, it says reporting from Fusion Center was often flawed, unrelated to terrorism. It was often outdated, duplicative, informative, and the DHS intelligence reporting officials. So now remember that this information is going to Fusion Centers from SARS and other information that is being collected by the LAPD and several other law enforcement agencies. So this is what the U.S. Senate Special Subcommittee under the leadership of Carl Levin and Tom Coburn had to say. Tom Coburn has since retired. He was a senator from Oklahoma. Carl Levin was from Michigan. So going back to SARS, this is what the U.S. Senate had to say. Then we also found a report that the National Academy of Sciences came out with in 2008. And what they did was, and this is what Mike Downing always talks about, who's the head of Major Crimes Division, that the two key standards are behavioral surveillance and data mining in the SAR program, that we are observing behavior, right? What is missing in the report, and I'm just going to step ahead a little bit and come back, is that even the IG says that they surveil behavior. That is probably the most racist thing that I've ever had. Because what they're saying is that they're pathologizing people. There's a person behind the behavior. Behavior is not an output of a computer. There's a person behind the behavior. So it's actually the person that is being profiled who is behaving in a particular way. It's not the behavior that is going on. But this is what the National Academy of Sciences had to say. National Academy of Sciences said, let me just go back to the, well, you can read it, that it says that on behavioral surveillance that although research and development on certain aspects of this topic are warranted, there is no scientific consensus whether these techniques are ready for operational use at all in counterterrorism. Completely. That's what the National Academy of Sciences had to say. In regards to data mining, they said that although these methods have been useful in the private sector for spotting consumer fraud, they are less helpful for counterterrorism because so little is known about what patterns indicate terrorist activity. Now, let me just show you that report because, again, we're dealing with a group of people that will try to discredit you. And this is the information from the National Academy of Sciences. This is where they talk about, this is the basic executive summary that they talk about these, the behavioral surveillance and data mining. Let's get to the audits now. So let me just see if I can go back to the big one. Here. So there have been 3 audits, as has been said. In March 2013, the Inspector General released an audit which covered a 4-month sample of SAR reports. In that, what we found that 82% of SARs were filed on individuals identified as non-white. Now, let me just take you to that audit, and this is something that this is. Open that up real quick. SAR audit. This is 2013. This is the 2013 SAR audit. This is, and Bustamante is sitting right there. This is his signatures and all that. Here is the race data. This is a small sample, okay? So the largest sample is black. Now, what attacks had happened that black people were identified as potential terrorists? Of course, they are claimed as potential terrorists, but this is a program that black was the largest sample. And when you look at the rest of the samples, when you look at white, that comes to 18% of the total sample. Again, reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning. suspicious activity, suspicious behavior, a suspicious that is constantly attached to a person's personhood. It doesn't require you have to be a person of color. You have to be a poor person, you have to be a black person, increasingly a Middle Eastern person, and Muslim as well. The proof is all in the pudding. Let me just get back.
I can't read that line above there. What's it say about, go back one slide. There's a line, it's too small. Read that SAR database involved.
Involved persons, data for each applicable SAR is described by the reporting officer or a community member. A community member is originally the reporting party for 27 of the 33 SARs
So, wait a
contained.
minute, of the 33 here, 27 weren't reported by police, they were reported by the community?
Exactly.
Okay.
So we are giving people a license to racially profile. This is state-sanctioned bigotry if we have seen that. This is exactly what state-sanctioned bigotry is. That here is a license, you deem the other person suspicious, we will put them in a database, and we will say, we didn't do anything. It's the people who are doing it. Right, Mr. Soboroff? Right.
Yeah, I'm just
Thank you.
reading.
Let's go to, and this is something, Ms. Hill, that you were not here last year, and there was a mockery made of the community by Alex Bustamante and Steve Soboroff. We will show you that video as well. We have it on tape. This exposed, and I'll go back to the report as well, that of all the SARs that went to fusion centers, keep that in mind, of all the SARs that went to fusion centers, 30% of those SARs identified individuals as black. Going into counterterrorism files. Wherever gender was identified, 50% were black women. Now let's just walk through that audit now, okay? And I'll take you through that audit. Where is, everybody's looking at my,
Geez, you got a lot of whatchamacallits.
well, that's why.
Mr. Khan, again, this item
This
is
is-
on.
this is
Listen,
about
listen to me.
SAR going
No, no,
to-
no.
and
It's
keep
not just.
quiet
about,
now.
no, shut up. Listen to me.
Mr.
Listen to
Khan.
me. Okay.
Mr. Khan, I've given you a courtesy by giving you this time. Treat the city attorney with respect.
But he-
You need to
no,
listen to what he says, or I can end this at any time.
Yeah, you too. Mr. Khan, listen to me. I'm not saying it's not related to SARS. What I'm saying is it has to be related to this audit. That's what's on the agenda, not SARS in general. This is not an agenda item about SARS. It's about this audit. And what you're doing...
Can I have order, please?
What you're doing...
Am I not speaking about the audits?
Listen to me. What you're doing is you're going back and you're going through other audits. All I'm saying is it's beyond the scope. That's what I'm saying. That's my point. So if you allow me the courtesy...
About the 2013, 2015 audit, was he out of line?
What I'm saying is I'm not telling you to stop. What I'm telling you is you need to be careful about the scope of your discussion. And I realize that you skipped over some of the things, and I appreciate that. But the scope of this discussion has to do with this audit and those things discussed in there. So to the extent you have... Allow me. To the extent...
We have order, please.
To the extent
order,
that your
please.
report...
If we can't get order in here, then I'm going to shut this
incorporates-
conversation down. So please, let's have order.
To the extent that your report incorporates the data and the sources for the audit, it would be appropriate. I'm just cautioning you. That's all I attempted to do before you became...
I have a suggestion. So the suggestion...
I think...
I have a suggestion. Okay, this was suggested earlier that you should finish. Continue with your report now, and then President Johnson proposed that in the future it's agendized to have a general
whole hearing
SAR
on this.
report, and I would also add that that would be a helpful agenda item, and if we had other stakeholders like Peter Biebring from ACLU or something like that, to have just some discussion around that. But anyway, so that's my suggestion.
So,
continue on.
and so I'll move on to that. I just wanted to show you as the audits, because this is relevant. This is a 2015 audit. This is the previous audit, so it's building towards this current audit, as it was stated. So you have 33 individuals identified as black out of 109, so that's 30% of the individuals. And look at the gender count in orange. You have 12 women, 6 of them are black. So this is the information that is going into the fusion centers, into where the counterterrorism files are held. Now let's go to this audit, right? This is what you wanted to, what you wanted me to do. Let me just go back to it. So what's really interesting is that the Inspector General says that it is in 100% compliance. What does it mean by it's in 100% compliance? So in essence, what this audit is, that it's not an audit, it's a report. It's a report of the administrative process, whether something is being filed or not, which again, there have been violations in that as well. But the fundamental essence of the program is missing. It is completely missing. Because if you have a program out of which 56% are unfounded, something is fundamentally wrong with this thing. And it's not only by the people. 38% of the SARs that were filed by officers were unfounded as well. That is the figure that nobody asked. This is all in this audit. That even the officers that filed those SARs, 38% are unfounded. And the total SARs, so 136 are unfounded, 107 are sent to the Joint Regional Intelligence Center, right? Out of those 156 SARs, where they said involved persons are there, again, when you look at the sample, 79% people are non-white. A very large sample of Middle Easterns, which is 63 Middle Eastern, 24%. So what we are doing here is that, again, we have created an environment, we have created conditions to deem people suspicious, and this is what the audit is completely missing. That it's not looking at the deeper issues of what does it really mean. It's not looking at that what reasonably indicative, observed behavior, how is it informing people, and why are people calling these SARs, which then end up being unfounded. When you look at these things, this is what is going on. Then you look at 100% compliance, yet at the same time, Matt Johnson, you asked that the SARs were scanned into the ICAR system, ICAR system. Well, that was a violation. So why was the program in 100% compliance? How can they claim that it was in 100% compliance where there were violations taking place? So I think that's the question. How can you just rubber stamp something and just say that this is 100% compliance?
If we approve it, we're approving the findings, which included, by the way, you mentioned the number of officer generated that were not appropriate, right. which were identified, which I found concerning, which the IG's office found concerning, and there was a specific recommendation related to that regarding greater training for the officers, which was a recommendation that was agreed with by the department. So that will be addressed. It was I didn't raise it because it was addressed as an issue. There was a recommendation specifically related to it, and the department agreed with it.
The question here is, Mr. Johnson.
I'll give you a couple more minutes, but then there's public comment on this also.
The question here is that on one hand, you're talking about officer training. On the other hand, what is also happening is that the 2015 audit, last year's audit showed that 80% of these SARs came from community informants. This SAR shows 68% came from community informants as well. Who's going to train the people? Because the people are being told to call other people as suspicious and open and which leads to opening up of these files. So that's really a major issue over here. You can do all the training you want, but it continues to be. This program has been around for 9 years now. This is not a new program. It started in March of 2008. It's 8.5 years since this program has been going on. And yet you have 38% from officers that are unfounded, yet you have 56% of the total SARs that are unfounded. Something is because what it comes down to is that this is fundamentally a flawed program. It triggers bigotry, it triggers suspicion, it triggers bias. And this is what it's going to, and I'm going to stop here by saying, and just a few points that I want to make, that when he talked about that there is no claims of bias or there was no bias reported, I mean, we just talked about bias policing. You're speaking from both sides of your mouth that, there is no bias, but yet at the same time, 1,517 over the last 3.5 years zero has been sustained. So how can we even believe that there's no bias? Then they talk about that we surveil behavior and not the person. Well, there's a person behind this, so it's again pathologizing the person as well. So in essence, what we have is that this whole audit by itself is flawed. This whole audit by itself needs to be rejected. And what our demands is that the commission should take immediate step to stop the LAPD SAR program and thoroughly investigate the human and civil rights violations of Angelenos. Secondly, our demand is that to rescind the SAR program and terminate the iWatch See Something, Say Something program with immediate effect. And our last demand is that release all SARs to the public with full reparations to those whose civil and constitutional rights have been violated. there was a report last year that close to about 100, and I'm ending it right here, that 125 or 126 million dollars were paid out by the city and the county to people whose civil rights were being violated. I will end by saying we are now in a process of litigating LAPD. We filed a lawsuit in December of last year. We're going to trial on 22nd of November. This is a CIPRA, California Public Records Act lawsuit. These are unfounded SARs. They don't want to release them. Just nothing. They're claiming investigatory exemption. What sort of investigatory exemption is that when these are unfounded and then they're destroyed? Release them to the public, let people know what is going on. But yet they continue to fight this thing. So we hope you will take an action. We hope you will listen to our demands and do something meaningful today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a comment. I do think that
I'm open for questions.
I do think that this information is helpful to understand some of the structural consequences of historical programs that came to be post 9/11, when there was a sort of a fury of anti-terrorism activity and suspicion. I also appreciate the Inspector General's report. I think that they work with a lot of integrity, and clearly they do their job very thoroughly and very well. So that's all to say that I think all perspectives are important. And I've spent a lot of time doing these structural critiques, and it does help us to understand the IG's report in context. I just want to make that comment, and I appreciate both. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Only that I want to first thank Commissioner Johnson for permitting the deviation from the way that we typically run our meetings in order to allow an extended presentation on this matter. Also to note that perhaps we, going forward, can give some thought to how we agendize certain items in order to perhaps not run into the difficulty where we have very narrow comments, so that we can maybe open things up a little bit, because I think that's really all that happened here. There was certainly no intent on the part of the presenter to violate the Brown Act or to speak beyond what was agendized. And I'm confident no attempt on the part of the commission, and certainly via Commissioner Johnson's actions, to seek to limit the kind of information that's put before the commission. Just a little conflict between what's agendized and what was being reported, and to say, as Commissioner Kim has indicated, certainly appreciate the perspective and data from members of the public, as it does help to illuminate our own understanding of issues before us. So thank you for that.
I appreciate your perspective. I have some questions and comments, but I'm going to wait till you do your next 15 minutes and complete the whole thing and do it all at the same time.
Mr. President, for the record, it's important to note that the agenda was published on Friday. I received inquiry from Mr. Khan yesterday afternoon. There was no time to amend the agenda, so the agenda was prepared before the presentation was even suggested. So there was no attempt to stifle Mr. Khan's comments or his response. The city attorney was doing his job, keeping the focus to the agenda item before the public, which is the purpose of an agenda. Just want to make that very clear.
Well, we'll look forward to a bigger hearing and public hearing. Just to FYI, that 6 or 7 neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles have already passed motions against the SAR program. They want these programs to be completely terminated, and I hope you take meaningful action. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, sir. We have 21 cards. The first 5, Prentice Jenkins.
We're going to limit each comment to 1 minute each on these 21, and I apologize in advance. I have to leave the meeting.
Prentice Jenkins, Jerry Dietrich, Audrey George.
Prentice Jenkins, City Life newsletter publisher, activist since 1991. Thank you, Hamid Khan. That was very profound and informative. It was also shocking, but believe it or not, that's how you start building bridges between the community and the police. You start with that right there. Bridges are not easy to build. People die falling off those bridges, building them, and they're very, very difficult things to build. And based on what Mr. Hamid Khan said, I see an enormous bridge starting to be built. I'd like to also say that I'm not in favor of the SARS program, but I do understand that there's some people out there trying to kill us, and it's not until you win one of those bombings at the airport that you realize you're in favor of the SARS program.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Jerry Dietrich again, and I will be brief. I only have a minute anyhow. It'll take less than that. I just want to reiterate what Hamid already said, that this whole thing is a big secret. And even if you file a California Public Records Act request, you can't get the information. And that's unheard of. In my opinion, that's, it's just unprecedented. It really is, and it should stop.
Thank you.
Audrey George.
Audrey, White People for Black Lives. Thank you, LAPD, Stop LAPD Spying, for that great presentation. Just like with the gang member database program, I find the whole idea of the SARS system, the fact that we have one in the first place, to be abhorrent and scary. And I think that it creates fear and confusion and recreates the kind of suspicion that people have of each other, like from the McCarthy era and in Nazi Europe, where people were always afraid to say anything in front of other people and were always turning on each other. And I hate that you're doing that to our city. I want to also say that it confuses things. As Hamid's presentation showed, it's not just terrorism, suspected terrorism, it's suspected criminal activity, which is going to lead to reporting on activists, protectors,
Thank you.
protesters, occupiers, decolonizers.
Next, you want to call the next speakers up?
Ashley Richardson Hall, Jojo Smith, Elizabeth Thornton.
Ashley Richardson Hall with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition in LA CAN. I'm here against the Inspector General's report on SARS and against the SARS program altogether. The fact that you do not find any biased policing in the SARS collection and reporting is absurd. In the gender count...
I'll give you your time back. Excuse me for 1 second.
Can you stop the time?
Yeah,
Thanks.
you'll get your time back, ma'am. He said he would give it to you.
Okay, you can start your time over.
Oh, thank you.
For the public's
As I was
information, Chief
saying-
Downing is sitting in for Chief Beck.
As I was saying, your collecting and reporting of SARS and your findings is absurd. In the gender count, 50% of SARS were collected on black women. And what we saw earlier today with the behavior of Melina in sitting where she can sit, where seats are provided, we see the behaviors that you need to control, and we also see the bodies that you fear. Your attempt to control behaviors, bodies, and people highlight this commission and the LAPD's insecurity and threat of losing power. We see the pathologizing of people and behaviors all the time by the SCI task force in Skid Row, where I work. We see your behaviors, we understand your tactics, and we do not trust you, nor do we fear you. We know and fully understand this strategy of genocide, and we come here weekly to remind you of our power. We demand that you stop the suspicious activity reporting, and we need you out of our communities. You are racist,
Next
you
speaker,
are
please.
terrorists, and you are powerless against us, and we're not going to stop. Fuck you.
Jojo Smith for Los Angeles Community Action Network. This program is a failure. We talk about terrorists, but if you really look at the definition of terrorists, I'm surrounded by guns in a room that we do not have no guns. We are brought in here, we have to take and go through machines to see if we have guns. I'm afraid every day I come in here. Last time I was here, my partner that is pregnant got hit by a police because she accidentally bumped, but she had her hands up. But she's a black woman, so they're feared of a black people. We need to stop allowing LAPD to be terrorists. Stop giving LAPD money to be terrorists. The children are seeing what's going on. They see every day that they have to be afraid of walking down the street. Because this is a police force of terror.
Elizabeth Thornton, followed by Beth Kemp.
Suspicious activity reporting is a program that was sold to the public under the presumption that it had safeguards. These so-called safeguards were three. One, the intradepartmental screening that was supposed to identify unfounded SARS and put them on a schedule for destruction. The reasonable indication standard, a standard that, while without definition in policy or in case law, was supposed to require additional evidence of criminal intent for people to report on photography. And finally, the potential nexus to terrorism standard, without which these SARS were supposed to not be put on blast federally through the information sharing environment. Another definitionless standard, but one that was supposed to mean something. But as this audit makes explicit, unfounded SARS have been kept in digital databases indefinitely and are still being forwarded to other entities for investigation. So your first safeguard is meaningless. The Inspector General's own definition of nexus to terrorism in Roman numeral 5 renders both that standard and the lower reasonable indication standard meaningless.
Speaker Beth Kemp, followed
His
by
definition of nexus to terrorism
Joy T. Chand and Jamie
is
Garcia.
it includes the 16 activities. So we can see why people who have photographed have had their information forwarded to joint terrorism task forces for investigation, as was disclosed in redacted SARS from 2012 that were released to the ACLU. Your audit is meaningless.
It'll leave the meeting now.
Except as an admission of how meaningless your safeguards are. I'm sorry, I'm taking back some of the time you stole from the community by disrupting Hamid's presentation.
Next speaker.
Beth Kemp.
I'd like to start by saying this meeting is in violation of the Brown Act because there are empty seats and you're refusing to let people into it. That is a violation of the Brown Act. Number two, while you're filling suspicious activity reports, why not go after this motherfucker with the camera over here who's interrupting the meeting and making people feel uncomfortable? Why does he need to film when you have a facial recognition camera sitting right here? That's what that is. I'm not stupid. I know my technology. That's a facial recognition camera, and it's going to, where else? The Fusion Center, okay? This is a joke. This is an absolute joke. This board does not respect the people. You don't respect our time, and you don't respect our voices. To see Steve Silveroff and these other fools over here, Matthew Johnson, they need to step down because all they are doing is disrespecting the public, disrespecting our time, speaking over us and telling us to shut up. No, you shut the fuck up and listen. That's what your fucking job is.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question. Are there members of the public who are waiting for seats?
Not to my knowledge, but I'll have Lieutenant Waters check.
Okay, because...
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Jyoti Chand, and I'm a member of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and also supported BLM's encampment. It was a 54-day encampment to fire this fool right here. When we're talking about the SARS program, we're not talking just about numbers. We're not just talking about data. We're talking about our lives. We're talking about a 14-year-old child murdered. We're talking about an 18-year-old child murdered. We're talking about moms crying. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about my black neighbor with an elder and a 21-year-old child going to his daughter's birthday party. That's what we're talking about. SARS was not adopted by LAPD in 2008. SARS is a policy of 1492. SARS is a policy of 1619, where they've traced us, they've tracked us, They've controlled our body. They've controlled our movement. They've criminalized us. They've imprisoned us. And fool, what you're about to do right now, to shut us up. That's what SARS is. This is about our lives. Shame on all of you. Shame on all of you to allow this. We're talking about stop. We're talking about
You're just going to keep
a
talking.
14-year-old
so I
child
asked you to
dead.
stop, so I'm asking you to stop.
We're talking about Isar4 dead
Your last
because
warning.
of SARS.
That was
The next speaker,
We're
Jamie
talking
Garcia.
about kids in our neighborhood
Your time is up.
scared to walk home
You can
because
leave the
they're
room.
being profiled, because
can
they're
leave the room.
suspicious.
Next speaker.
Next speaker, Jamie Garcia, followed by Angela James and Michael Novick.
Next speaker. So you can start the clock on the next speaker.
Is Jamie Garcia present?
You know, you should be really, you are just,
I've
you
already
should
asked
be
for-
really ashamed of yourselves.
Time is up. I'd
How
like her
many
to leave the
times have
room.
we seen mothers in this room come in here and say their children have been murdered? Get the fuck away from me.
Okay. I'm going to call a recess and
Fuck all of you.
and
Fuck
maybe
you.
We'll stop the end of the comment too. No, she's not. She needs to leave. That's your last warning. No, you just have to follow the rules like everybody else. You can leave the meeting.
Wait a minute,
Okay, she can
is
leave.
it possible that we
can leave.
could
You're out.
figure out how to move forward
speaker?
with the meeting? Just
The next speaker is Jamie Garcia.
please.
For the record, Mr. President, there is no one outside waiting to come in.
Thank you, sir.
So the IG audit claims that the SAR program surveils only behavior and not people. But this is a complete smokescreen and a play on words and practice. In fact, the IG audit claims, as the number shows, is itself racist since it pathologizes people of color as inherently criminal. So there's a person behind the behavior. In reality, it's that person that is deemed suspicious. The audit shows that overwhelmingly numbers of persons engaging in supposedly suspicious behaviors are non-white. So as we've heard, the Inspector General's audit on the SAR program continues to demonstrate a clear pattern of racial profiling. The facts show that the SARS program is really a license to racially profile. The acts, and this is just something to put all this into context because he spoke a lot about this lone wolf. The acts of global violence and war cannot be won by weeding out community members, as if the people of Los Angeles are responsible for acts of war. Let us be clear to address and understand is that it's those persons in office that engage in irresponsible and criminal foreign policy that are responsible for perpetual war. The SARS program only continues the irresponsible decision-making that we see on a global level. The continual persecution and incarceration of persons of color and poor people will not make the world safer.
Thank
The
you,
SARS
Jamie.
program
Next speaker,
must be
please.
rescinded.
Angela James, followed by Michael Novick and the Red Chief.
The sham of this audit is exemplified by the behavior of the vice president of this commission. It is absurd that in light of the dismissal of thousands of discrimination complaints that you would expect us to believe in this SARS report, I cannot believe that 50% of the women who were reported on in this way were black women, except for that I do believe this is a gross abridgment of our constitutional rights, and thereby by declaring groups as that are participating in constitutionally protected political behavior terrorists or their behavior terroristic, you thereby open the door to abridge them of their rights. And so this audit is a non-audit. What are you auditing exactly? The report is a sham, as is this commission. By your behavior, you show that you are not independent representatives of the people.
Thank you for your opinion. Next.
Michael Novick.
You're welcome.
The last time LAPD was engaged in illegal spying and they were forced to disband the Public Disorders Intelligence Division because of their surveillance, what happened? They were told to destroy all the files, and instead they turned them over to a private white nationalist organization called the Western Goals Foundation They contracted illegally with the Anti-Defamation League to carry out political espionage, and they directed it against people involved in the anti-apartheid movement, black college students, and others. And they reformulated under the so-called Anti-Terrorist Division. And so what you're doing now under SARS is you're providing institutionally the exact same mechanism for absorbing all that information and sharing it with 18,000 agencies and private organizations involved in so-called security under so-called anti-terrorism that's directed at people who are political dissidents and basic community members trying to defend their own lives. And if you look at the exposure of COINTELPRO, one of the things they found out when they invaded, they broke into the FBI headquarters in Media, Pennsylvania, is the FBI had snitch network following every
Next speaker, please.
I'll
Thank
finish
you,
the sentence.
Michael.
Every black college student in the United States who is not going to a historically
speaker.
black college
Sir?
or university was being surveilled by the FBI through a
Michael?
snitch network. And that's what's going on now.
The Red Chief Hunt, followed by Tiffany Guerra.
Let the people finish their final thought. First of all, the Inspector General, you're no Andre Barak, so your report is real fucked up. Andre Barak went to become a U.S. Supreme Court judge. Now, let me tell you this. Brandenburg versus Ohio, what we're going through, and Hunt versus the city of Los Angeles. But if you define what the people are really saying, and you go to Penal Code Section 22.6.A, you guys find that the police officers are really in violation of whatever they do. That's really important for you, Ms. McClain. You got to write that section code down, because this is what all of these people were talking about, Section 422.6 of the Los Angeles Penal Code, Point A. And if you read that, then you read into what all of these people are saying. You guys have been in violation, and the reports are inaccurate. The dude, he told you guys that.
The suspicious activity point report is racially biased at the least, right? It's racist at the best, right? If you look at the numbers here, 79% in 2015 of the SARS report was supposedly non-whites, okay? 50% of the women reported were black, right? That's interesting because Black Lives Matter is a womanist movement, which is led by a lot of black women, so that's very interesting. Okay, so if we look at, right, mass shootings, which are the most terrorist attacks that have happened on this country since 9/11, right? If we look at it, out of 83 mass shootings, that's between 1998 till now, right, out of 83, 48 were committed by white people. Yet your report shows that in 2015, white people only made up 13% of the filings, and in 2016, it only made up 21%.
Okay, thank you.
If it was really
Next speaker,
about
please.
finding who's suspicious and who's doing crime, it would be a lot more than that, I think.
Okay, the next three: Melina Abdullah, Jasmine Abdullah, Akili, Matthew Preston Schubert, Ted Hayes, and Yvonne Michelle Autry.
So these are the last two.
Ted Hayes.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Schubert. Okay.
I'm
And the last one was Autry?
Autry, yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. First of all, good morning again. I would like to say that about the Inspector General's comment about 9/11 terrorist attacks, it's clear that the 9/11 terrorist attacks are known to this department for the reason why. It's clear that this department is trying to make peace with the situation, not as fast as they should be, which is why I am involved. I'm trying to re-secure this situation. I'm a powerful influence. I'm very good at communication. The Inspector General is not being fully forthcoming about the situation. It's not 100% compliance because we're involved. I'm involved. I have a team involved. And you have problems in the city that's causing terrorism attacks. It's not about fear. It's about energy. And if you don't have the energy to get the job done, you're a waste of time and you don't deserve to be represented. And that's how it needs to be taken.
Mr. Hayes.
In recounting a partial history of America's endless perpetual wars, there was an invasion of an island in the Caribbean, Grenada. One of the conquering military persons wanted to call in a bombardment or airstrike, but he couldn't do that because the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps communicated with him with either by radio or any other way. So he had to pull an ET event. He called home, had his mother call Washington, and Washington called the military in the Pacific and bombarded Grenada. The Soviet Union warned us about 9/11, but there was no communication. It didn't go down the line. So it's not the people who can determine who is going to pass the information. It's the fact that our military and our government is ineffective, and that's what keeps us in jeopardy.
Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Okay, so we move on? Need a motion for approval?
We have one more speaker,
Oh,
sir.
there's one more? I'm sorry.
Here's Ms. Autry.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Yeah, I guess you wish, huh? What I'd like to say first in calling for the resignation of Charlie Beck and also your president, Matthew Johnson, I have never in 13 years seen any one of you disrupt one of your own officers' presentations, not once in 13 years.
Stay on topic, please.
And I am on topic. What I'm stating about black women having been called a terrorist for the last 20 years simply because I defended my own civil rights and because I wouldn't pass and because I spoke up and watching the socialization and the breakdown of our people, which you are justifying a Holocaust. You're justifying a Holocaust by labeling us as terrorists. And in the Grim Reaper murders, which the police were aware of, because I have testimonies of some of the other men which were not apprehended, the black women that were murdered were called not human by your police officers in their reports. So how is it that your labeling is corroborating and justifying the extermination of black men and black women in your pursuit of an all-white world that are good and blessed and rich and accursed, homeless black people that you can justify exterminating as you lose power in your fear of a people that might rise to parity?
Thank you. Is that the last?
There are no other comment cards, sir.
Okay, this is item 3B. May we have a motion for approval of the Inspector's General's report?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, you can leave. You can leave. You can leave. I know it's lunchtime. Go ahead. Do we have a second? Oh, what? No. They'll get it. They're going to leave. What? Yeah. No, we didn't vote. We didn't vote. Okay, we did vote? Okay, good. Okay, let's go to number 4. You can leave. Novik, leave. Hey, Novik, leave. I'm asking you to leave. You want officers to take you out? So you want me to end the meeting? We'll end the meeting.
So we don't have to end the meeting, I don't think, but
I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do right now.
No.
You can leave the
I
meeting.
think
No, wait. I've got the meeting. It's okay. Thank you.
They just will be quiet. We can move
You guys have a chance to keep the meeting going. I'm asking you to leave. Are you going to leave or no? Okay. Recess. Recess.
I think so. There is, but you can't.
I know now, but
Yeah.
Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Let's go to item number 3D.
We're on 3C, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, 3C. Do we have any speakers on
We
3C?
have 2 comment cards for 3C.
Okay, and are there any questions of the department on this?
Okay.
And Mr. President, for this item, when the action is taken, it's incorrect on the agenda. It is to accept the department's report.
So all
If
we're
that-
doing
if
here
that
is
the
accepting the report. We're not
That is correct.
approving the report. Okay.
Okay. Would you like me to
The
call the comment
speakers?
cards? Okay. Michael Novick and Tut Hayes.
Novik's left. And Mr. Hayes, are you still here, sir?
The 2 minutes, sir, or one?
2.
Point of information or curiosity, there's no memorandum on 3C. I have no idea what penalty is. I'm a little confused because I understand that.
Stop the clock. Mr. Tiefenk?
If the item was in the book, Mr. Hayes, if someone took it out of the book, I can't control that. It is in the book in the back.
I looked, it's not there.
I'll go back and look myself right now.
Okay. But anyway, I couldn't find it. And penalty is something I'm not familiar with. I know what a fine is, and I know a fine is associated with committing a crime. But, you know, we always have these clauses about fees and taxes and things like that. So I don't know what a penalty is. And Mr. Tiefbank's going to find out for me. So I know how I simply don't know how to respond to this, but I really didn't want to talk about penalties except to find out what they're all about.
Okay. Mr. T, in the book?
It was in the book, Mr. Hayes. You just missed it.
I might also point out that.
Here's a personal copy for you.
Thanks, sir. I might also point out at one time they used to flag each agenda item. They don't do that anymore.
Okay, thank you.
They don't flag them, so they don't stick out so you can see what the items are. That would be quite helpful. I'll supply the flags if you want me to. Thank you.
There are no other comment cards on this item.
Okay. May we have a motion to receive the department's report?
So moved.
Do we have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
We're on item 3D.
3D?
We have no
Juvenile
comment
arrest?
cards.
How many cards?
None, sir.
No speaker cards? Is there anyone that has any questions of the department regarding item 4D?
No.
No. Then may we have a motion for approval of 4D?
Move
I'm
to
sorry,
approve-
it's 3D.
Move to approve the item.
Sandy, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Item number E, are there any speaker cards?
We have 2.
Okay.
We have Jamie Garcia and Jerry Dietrich. Jamie Garcia is not present. Jerry Dietrich,
She's left also.
she's also left.
Okay. Are there any questions about the digital in-car video system audit? Okay. May we have a motion for approval of the department's report in the executive
So
summary?
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Anybody opposed? Okay. Public comment period, how many?
We have 17 cards, sir.
Okay. Let's see how many people are here.
Okay.
Well,
We
I
have-
want to call them, and if your name is called, will you just hold your hand up so we can see how many people are here? Go ahead.
Okay, we have Prentice Jenkins,
Mr. Jenkins is here, okay?
Patty Highland,
Is Patty here? Okay.
Jojo Smith,
She's left.
Keep
Beth
going.
Kemp, the Red Chief. The Red Chief here.
Keep going.
Matthew Schubert, Michael Novick,
She's gone.
Trevor Gerard.
Okay, so let's start with those, and
2 minutes.
Mr. Jenkins, 2 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I just want to say I appreciate the fortitude that President Johnson and Vice President Sobroff have. You guys know how to take it on the chin. That's what real boxers know how to do, and stay in the ring. So well done. Wow. When we're discussing, the civil rights movement was fraught with insults. It was fraught with danger, with murder. Martin Luther King was seen as building bridges, while Malcolm X was seen as burning them down. Right? All right, but somehow it worked. And at some point, and you're talking to a 12-year-old, to a 9-year-old who was there, watching the riots of '68 from the upstairs window of his house as a 9-year-old, and watching the riots in the city of Kansas City explode after the murder of Martin Luther King. But King built bridges, and Malcolm X said he's a house nigga, but he built bridges. Bridges are being built whether you see it or not. Bridges are being built between the community and the police. Somebody's got to build a bridge, because guess what? If we don't build a bridge, we all going to fall in that hole. So we got to build a bridge, and that's what I'm here to do, to continue to build the bridge. I want to say the bridge to this bridge is going to be a bridge that suggests this bridge is going to help the community and the police heal the rift between the hate and the disdain that the community has for the police department. Somebody's got to do it. I'll do it like Martin Luther King. And if Malcolm wants to call me a house nigga, I'm fine with that.
Mr. President, for the public's information, Deputy Chief Bill Scott is sitting in for Chief Beck.
Thank you. Next.
I want to go back to the basics, and I see something that hasn't been taken care of. Waukesha Wilson's mom sitting in the audience. She died at the hands of another, and that's police brutality. She needs a check for $3.5 million. I'm calling that forthwith. It's no excuse for you not to contact her parents, or for her parents not to know for 3 or 4 days where she's at, and she was in the morgue. That is calling for her due right to due process. Hunt versus the city of Los Angeles. Get the check ready, pay the lady, and let's get on with that, because she died at hands of another. The city is so fucking sad. You guys can never come back with a direct investigation for the people's family. That's what Matt Johnson says. We're calling for a direct investigation. But it's going to be fucked up like the rest of you guys' reports are. So here's what I'm saying to you guys. Get the check ready, because if I get behind her, the check will be ready. I haven't lost yet to you motherfuckers, and I ain't going to lose not one. You know, please look at 422.6A, Miss McLean. If you really want to know about the police, look at that thing. Get Waukesha's mom a check for $3.5 million. She died at hands of another. Anytime you die in jail, that's at hands of another. That's the police responsibility. I don't care how many checks you do. She should have either been seen by a doctor, a psychiatrist, which Metropolitan doesn't have, so it was hands of another. I know. I've been over there. They arrested me when they took me to jail for wearing the scarf again. I've been to Metropolitan. They have neither. It took them 6 hours for them to take me to the hospital, to the medical ward. I know if it takes them 6 hours to take me to the medical ward, they wasn't doing shit for her daughter. Get her a check.
The next 3 speakers, Trevor Gerard, Paula Miner, Kai Utsumi.
What's really depressing all the time about coming here and listening to you guys speak is that white supremacy is also a system of logic, and it totally removes all context. Right? I'm getting tired of people using this terminology about bias. Right? Police bias, right, is a really nice and civil and sanitized way of talking about suppression, oppression, violence, brutality, rape, murder, and all the other sorts of things that you guys do in quote-unquote policing our communities. A couple weeks back, you replied to one of the comments that I made, and you said something about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The original wording of that document was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Who was the property at that time? Us, black folk. We were the property, right? To protect and serve, right? To protect and serve the property and interests of the established order. That's what the police is. I'll say it again. The police are little more than the domestic military arm of the United States government, right? And their sole focus in this country is policing and terrorizing communities of color and poor folk. That's a fact, right? And the longer that we come here, and I do appreciate the sort of the efforts that you're making to sort of deal with these people on the board, but the longer that in the same breath, you're an apologist for tyranny. The longer that we come here and try and put it in this framework of civil rights and not talk about human rights, right, then we're doing the people who have lost people a disservice, right? I don't want an independent board committee to decide. Let's take it to the United Nations, right? Let's see what they think about what you guys have been doing, right? That's the framework of this argument. And that's a legacy of what you've done. And Charlie Beck, of course, ran out the door before anybody could say anything really about that, right? But there were plenty of people when they were hanging folk at Nuremberg talking about I was just following orders.
Paula Miner, followed by Ted Hayes.
I'm yielding my time to Lisa Hines, the mother of Waukesha Wilson.
I don't know if it's morning or afternoon, but hello.
Hello.
The guy that was saying, give me a check, he said one thing that was true. Money will not bring my daughter back. I don't want a check. I want the police who killed my daughter and everybody who helped cover it up. I want them brought to justice. That's what I want more than anything. Okay, let me add, Miss McClay here. I don't know if you know the story or not. Inspector General, I'm trying to reach out to you, all of you guys really, actually. My daughter was killed March 27th. She was supposed to have been in court Tuesday. I was at the court building from the time they opened to the time they closed. I know everybody in the stations, in the court building, they knew why she wasn't there. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, 3 days have passed. I know they didn't put it in the system that she's deceased. When I was calling the station after I left the court building, why did it take 3 more days for them to tell me they needed my information, my callback number and stuff, so the watch commander could speak with me? Why did it, when I was calling between those 3 days, they told me they didn't know where she was, they was trying to find her, they couldn't locate her. How could that be, and she's in your custody? They didn't know what to say to me. They was trying to get their stuff together before I found out. They didn't know what to say. How can you not know where she is if you arrested her March 26th? She had a court date. And one more thing. That morning I talked to her, March 27th, I talked to her for 15 minutes. She told me she was going to call me back that evening to speak to me and the rest of the family and her only child. And she's my only child, mind you. I have no more kids. That was my only child. She promised to call me back. After we hung up, 5 minutes later, she had an altercation with an officer. 20 minutes after that altercation, they found her dead in the cell. Say she hung herself with a 3-inch phone cord. Then a week later, they say she was found in the middle of the floor, unresponsive. Charlie Beck told me he knows for a fact that she had no altercation with an officer. His detective told me he knows there was an altercation between Waukesha, my daughter, and a detention officer. Now, I'm puzzled. Who's lying? The detective, or is it Charlie Beck? Why is it took them 6 days to give me a phone, not tell me, the watch commander didn't tell me she had died. He gave me a phone number to the coroner's office. He didn't tell me it was the coroner's office. He told me when I called the number and they answered, asked for investigations. But I don't get a chance to ask for investigations because when they answered the phone, they said coroner's office. I automatically knew what the hell was going on. Do you know how I felt? Do you know how I still feel repeating this story? Do you have kids? Do any of you guys have kids? That was my only child. The last time I was here 2 weeks ago, Matt Johnson told me he was going to give the message to Charlie Beck to get in touch with my lawyer, Carl Douglas. He haven't got in touch with him. Why? Why is it that the LA, the city, DA, city attorney, somebody, one of them, they haven't even seen the videotape?
Thank you, ma'am. We're sorry for your loss.
You keep telling me that.
Inspector General, could you please provide us with some information about the stage of the investigation and when we will have findings regarding this case?
Ma'am, because that's covered by personnel, that includes personnel-related information, I'm not going to be able to give that information. As with every categorical use of force, I also think that that's probably something best left to the department to be communicating with them, because they're the ones that
I can't hear him speak, so can you be quiet, please?
They're the individuals that are conducting the investigation. My office will just be ensuring that the investigation looks at and examines everything pertinent to the inquiry, and to make sure that there's nothing untoward that was occurred or otherwise not investigated. But the department is the one that has the investigation. That's a determination for them, ma'am.
But my thing is, if you guys know she hung herself, why does the investigation take so long? It should be a shut and closed case. The video should have it.
A couple of things. So first, yes, I have children too. My first was a girl, and then a son. 3.5 years later, and I would be destroyed if anything happened to either of them, and would be beside myself with pain were I to know that there was some lag of time between something happening to them and my not knowing. I don't know of a parent who doesn't live in abject fear of something happening to their child that they somehow can't do anything about or can't find them or don't know. So just on that, let me say that I certainly understand, and I understand. The truth of the matter is, as it relates to the timing of information to use, let's say, and I wasn't here and I haven't been briefed and I don't know how long it took for them to tell you what happened, but assuming it took as long as it did, that is absolutely inexcusable. Don't know whose fault, don't care whose fault. It's difficult to justify, impossible to justify. As it relates to additional information about the investigation, there isn't a person up here that today can tell you when that's going to be forthcoming, but what I can tell you is every single thing that I can do in my power to expedite that process, I'll do. I can tell you that.
And we just need to say it's been 6 months.
I
6
hear you.
months, September 27th. So she's not asking for some kind of speeded up process.
No, I understand. I understand what you're saying. I heard
months.
what she said.
That's the first thing. That's the first kind of something I done heard that give me hope. The first time.
And we also we suggested this before, recommend that LAPD look at the notification procedure that occurs in this case, because their answer to her back in April was, well, it's the coroner's responsibility to tell you. We don't do that. And there's a flaw there. Again, we have a system that is just unbelievably flawed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Next speaker, please.
We have Ted Hayes, Jasmine Abdullah, Robert Sucher.
Thank you, Commissioner Silver, for that allowance, and may I say compassion. The city attorney cannot continually hijack this commission. He has to be recognized like every one of you must be recognized before he can speak out. Now, I know he's a thug and a strong arm verbally, and he takes care of the hard business for you, but he can't do that. Unfortunately for him, there's a state bar we can take him to if he keeps doing that, all right? And I shall do that, sir. I'm threatening you. So don't do that. Don't yield to their will. Tell them what they must do and direct them. Of course, they'll ignore you every time, but do that anyway. Now, what you must do is read the Brown Act, and wherever it says the body, B-O-D-Y, that means you must vote. If the body can cut the time, that means you have to vote to cut the time. If the body can clear the room, that means you have to vote to clear the room. So perhaps the city attorney hasn't read that and committed it to you yet, but he probably shall after I tell him to do his job correctly. His job is to suggest to you you follow the law. Now, when you're here and we recognize you're not following the law, that's a very negative impression of the chain of command when it comes to law enforcement and law obeyance. So when you read the Brown Act and anywhere you see their term body, recognize you've got to vote. It's called democracy. Perhaps you can exercise it among yourselves. Thank you.
Next.
The next three speakers, we have Keith, Yvonne Michelle Autry, and Pastor Q. Jan Marie. Is Keith present? Yvonne Michelle? Is Pastor Q. Jan Marie present? No? Okay.
Yes. So we'll all remember we're going to hold you to that. What I'd like to say also is that I know you are pawns in this New World white supremacist legalized extermination and Holocaust of black people, all people that you have placed in the trash so that you have to have a legal justification in your stigmatism, which is the basis of your predictive policing and your SARS. I've been labeled a terrorist for 20 years. I've been labeled a sex goddess. Your policemen follow me everywhere I go. I've been experimented on. Most people in my category are now recognized as TIs. That is the targeted individuals who have been experimented on, laser beam, microwave. We suffered illegal entries of our apartments, being sprayed with germ warfare, all different types of illegal, horrible, human, confidential, and covered up experiments and torture perpetrated by CIA, FBI, Secret Service, Black Ops, Special Ops. So, this is being exposed. And also what I'd like to say is something about the black woman and the sacrifice. This is a sacrifice. That woman was a sacrifice. These police officers know what that ritual was. Africa was a sacrifice. You are pawns in this process. For all those that you cannot break down, you see, then we're labeled terrorists. I want to go back to the 9/11. I'm so sorry for the loss of life, but you digress so that you detract from what we're saying here and focusing on ISIS and your comments, and you have to live with yourself. 9/11 was perpetrated by the Illuminati. America knew. Those people had left. The higher-ups weren't even in New York. So you were trying to, it's a diversionary tactic because, you're still liable, even though you're pawns in the Illuminati, you're low level, but you are responsible for the lives that your officers are taking because you're condoning it, because you're not holding them responsible, penalizing and prosecuting them to the fullest extent of the law. Many black women have been murdered. These are just the ones that have been exposed. Why weren't your DNA kits examined? Because, many of your officers would have been implicated with the test and the findings of the DNA. Why don't you talk about that ritual?
Comment. We do have 3 comment cards on item number 5, 5A1.
Okay.
We have Matthew Preston Schubert, We have Prentice Jenkins and Michael Williams.
Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for hearing me out today. It's been a positive day today. I think that we all together, are working very diligently, to get this ironed out. So let's continue. My comment today is I have many complaints in, and a lot of these complaints that I have filed in relationship to misconduct have been dismissed, unresolved, or thrown away in the trash, or dismissed, or just left alone. Unfortunately, this issue has provoked me, has given me more energy, has provided me more strength to continue to proceed in securing the situation. The first step in securing a complaint form is to
Mr. President, the speaker's
You got to
off
stay.
topic.
I know you're sort of just getting into this, but you have to stay on the topic at hand,
Thank you.
which you're not doing.
Okay, the topic is a misconduct complaint form, correct?
No, that's not the speaking topic now is in custody death that is on the agenda. It is not that topic.
Right, I'm going to lead up to that. So if you give me, if you have a little bit of patience, I'm going to lead right into that.
Actually, it's unintentional discharge.
What was that? I'm just setting the stage.
The topic is an unintentional discharge
Sorry, it's
of
an
a
unintentional
weapon.
discharge.
I'm going to lead right into that as
Well,
well.
you can go into it right now.
Okay.
Okay.
An unintentional discharge is not an appropriate term to be used. Not at this time and not in this situation. The reason for that is because there's multiple things going on in this city, and such fast movement creates further confusion. I know this because I've kept my mouth shut for a very long time. I've watched, I've listened in the community. We want to be a little bit more slower at our communication. Unintentional discharge is not the appropriate term here, and I ask you to reconsider.
Prentice Jenkins. Michael Williams.
So I put my speaker card in for 5A, which is the public discipline and dismissal, release public of employee performance evaluations. I want to put a performance evaluation on your public performance.
No.
Because
It's about unintentional discharge.
No. I put it on 5A. If you look
Yeah, this
at my
is
card,
5A.
If you look at no,
I don't
that's-
think you're looking at it. You need to read it all.
It says
Take
right
your time
here-
and read it, and then just start over.
It says right here, 5A, okay, public employee discipline, dismissal, release, public employee performance evaluations. All right. Subsection, it says unintentional discharge.
Right. Okay, go ahead.
This is section 1. I didn't put my card in for section 1. I put it in for 5A.
Whatever you go ahead and talk. Let's get to-
Thank you.
Yeah, can't
So
wait.
I want to put a public
doesn't matter what
evaluation on the commission because there is a discrepancy here. Like, you guys are really have avarice towards the community that comes here, and nothing we've said. I take very umbrage to people saying that we are badgering you or somehow you have to sit through this, because nothing that anybody has come up here and said is untrue or unfounded by statistics, analytics, facts, anything like that. So if you don't like hearing truth, then I guess you're being berated and abused. But if you like hearing truth and things that are true, then we're not doing anything to you. We're presenting you guys with cases and facts and things that are based on knowledge that we have acquired from your databases, from our community, from things that we have registered clearly. So when you guys, but you guys have a umbrage to it. You guys don't like hearing it. It's amazing to me that this is supposed to be a community commission council that doesn't want to hear the community, who doesn't want to sit here and listen to people speak about issues that they feel are important, who tell people to shut up during a presentation that they asked you and you approved to have on the agenda. So how is that fair or how is that right when this is supposed to be a community commission?
We'll adjourn to a closed session.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item number 5A1 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
Yes.
The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. In closed session, item number 5A1 was discussed and the Chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. Mr. Vice President, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Meeting adjourned.
Oh, meeting adjourned?
Hola, soy Marisol, desde Canoga Park, la ciudad toda americana. Estás viendo LA City View, Canal 35, nuestra ciudad, nuestro canal.
In LA this week,
lunch with Paul at the Cactus Taqueria. I'm Anna Marcos. Find out why these lunches with Councilmember Paul Krikorian are such hot topics coming up.
It's safer, it's more beautiful, and it conserves water. A plan to refurbish 100 or so soccer fields with synthetic turf comes to South Los Angeles. I'm Gil Reyes with the story next.
I'm Rasha Goel. Up next, why 18 Emmy-nominated television programs